And now, please welcome Claire Rosenzweig, President and CEO of the Better Business Bureau and the Metropolitan New York.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Responsibility, Sustainability, and ROI, doing well while doing good. This is a forum on socially responsible business strategies. I hope you're going to enjoy it. We look forward to a fairly robust program focused on how to build sustainable communities and how to generate a positive return on the social investment. This is the first time that we are holding an event of this type. We're extremely pleased you could join us today, and we promise an interesting exchange of some views and news about some pretty hot topics. Programs like this, of course, don't just happen, though, and I'd like to start out by saying thank you to a number of people and congratulating all of them, really, on putting together such a fabulous program. The first thank you goes to United Way of New York City, our leadership sponsor, and to Ernst & Young, our patron sponsor. We salute both of you for your long-term support of the BBB, and thank you so much for making this program possible today. Another huge thank you goes to Time Inc., our wonderful host for today's forum in their absolutely fabulous conference center. I want to thank Rhonda and McLean and Maurice Edelson, who are both here today. Thank you so much. Basically, and to your entire team, from the AV guys to the catering people, fabulous team here helping to make this happen. You know, a year ago, this program was just a thought. Our wonderful program committee really helped us think this through and come up with a program that would be unique to us, the BBB. And I want to thank them, too. Timothy McClyman with American Express, also a panel moderator today. Elise Myers with the New York Times, John Simone with Colgate-Palmolive, and Harriet Novitt with Time Warner Cable, who is also here today with a number of her colleagues. I also want to thank Luana Lewis, our Senior VP of Programs, who played a critical role in helping to pull together everybody's thoughts into what you're going to experience today. Also, Mary Montgomery and the rest of the BBB team you've seen helping us, and there's a whole crew back at the office. So, again, everybody really helped pull it together. Also, several organizations helped us today with helping to bring the awareness level up, because, again, BBB doing this program on CSR was something new. We wanted to make sure everybody knew about it. I want to thank the Advertising Club of New York, the BBB National Advertising Review Council, Mutant Media, who did the beautiful brochure and the email blast that you saw, New York County Lawyers Association, the Promotion Marketing Association, NewYorkCharities.org, and the Public Relations Society of America. I want to thank all of them for really helping to raise awareness on this program. Now, you're going to see that you have a welcome packet, those nice bags, which, again, thank you, Time, for providing those. You're going to find some useful, what we hope will be useful information in there. There's some white papers, some articles, and some other resource information, including the speaker bios, today's agenda, and background information about the BBB. Hopefully, you take this back. You can share it with people. If you want more of anything that's in there, you just let us know. You'll also find some clean index cards. What you use those for is as the speakers are speaking, if you have questions, write them down. We'll have BBB staff walking around and collecting them. We'll bring them up to the speakers, and they will answer as many as time allows. Now, why is the Better Business Bureau's Education Foundation staging this particular event? Because, again, there's the Better Business Bureau, but there's also the Better Business Bureau's Education Research Foundation, and we're presenting that today. When we started to put this program together, my directive was that it should really come from a unique perspective that of an organization whose foundation is trust. Because a lot of organizations do programs on CSR. Why should we do it? Well, the mission of the BBB is to be leaders in advancing marketplace trust. We're driven by the philosophy of transparency and accountability. As many of you know, the BBB was created by and is still supported by business leaders who are educating consumers and businesses about how to recognize good business practices. We tell everyone, check with us first, bbb.org, or locally, newyork.bbb.org. We help you locate reliable businesses and charities and to identify those scams and frauds and con artists. We get 60,000 complaints a year just in the New York area from people with a variety of issues. And so we're trying to be more proactive, this whole new branding, the whole new look and feel. Let's be proactive. Let's get people to look at bbb.org before they spend their money or before they utilize somebody's services or before they donate to a charity, because we have the 20 charity standards. What we're aiming at is that people can, in our logo, you see it there, that people can start with trust. See what we say about a company or a charity. It's a place to start. In that spirit of our mission, which is to inspire trust through transparency and high standards, we've been compelled to explore this area of socially responsible and sustainable business practices. These are issues that have a profound impact on the health and well-being of the community. Well, corporate social responsibility, it's been around for a while, but really within the past few years we've seen a dramatic increase in the corporate response to this issue. And as I've talked to some of you out there, the CSR field is not that easily defined. It cuts across many disciplines, including strategic and operational planning, legal and regulatory issues, risk management, public relations, corporate communications, scholarly study, sustainability efforts, which include but are not limited to what we hear so much about, the green issues, also nonprofit management and philanthropy. And no surprise, there's a lot of conversation and debate surrounding this whole arena. We talk about ROI in our title. We talk about ROI as one of those things that we hope to get across in terms of a comment that our chair of our foundation has said. It's in the article in your packet. The quote is, corporations need to endorse a wider vision than short-term profits. To address the climate of mistrust regarding business that has emerged in recent years, reputation risk is great today, if not greater than strategic operating and financial risk. CSR must promote a vitalized business ethic and a sense of corporate stewardship. It's simply good business. We all have something in common. We want our good efforts to pay off in terms of impact on the community, impact on everything. We want to live in healthy, economically sound communities. We want businesses and other organizations to see positive benefits when they take steps that help build better and more sustainable communities. And we want to be able to talk about our good deeds in a way that is credible and that merits trust. Therefore, we are so privileged today to have experts who are ready to talk about all of those, to give their insights on all of those areas. And so now we're going to start with Rhonda McLean, our host from Time Inc., and I want to add the incoming treasurer for the Better Business Bureau's Board of Directors, who will introduce our first speaker, Rhonda.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Time Inc. I am delighted that you all could join us at our first Corporate Social Responsibility Business Best Practices Forum. It's been a real pleasure to work with Claire, Luana, and the full BBB, as well as our Time Inc. team, to bring you this program. We hope it'll be the first of many. I'm actually going to introduce you to my boss, which is always a fun thing. But before I do that, I have a little housekeeping to get out of the way. You know about housekeeping, right? All right. So you understand that registration is just outside. Facilities are down the hall on your right. Refreshments will be available all morning. Help yourself at any time. I do need to alert you, though, that a part of corporate social responsibility is also comfort and safety. I actually am the fire warden for the law department, a job which I did not seek, and I'm not exactly sure how I attained it. But in that capacity, I am compelled by law to alert you that today, of all days, we reserved this room a year ago, not realizing that today is the day that our security staff is going to run a drill. Now, it may not impact us, but I need to tell you about it. I ask that you be given this at registration. There is a New York City Local Law 26. It's an ordinance that was passed after 9/11. And what it means is that in addition to the regular annual fire drills, actually we have them twice a year here, in addition to just going and standing by the exit door, we are now required by Local Ordinance 26 to actually practice leaving the building. So today we're not going to leave the building, but we may be asked, hopefully right at the time we would be leaving anyway, to go down 4 floors. So I just don't want you to be alarmed. This is a drill. We're not being attacked. But I don't want you to be alarmed. You will hear an announcement and just do whatever they tell you to do. And just so you know, as a good fire warden, the closest set of stairs are right in the middle of the auditorium lobby. There is a big B, and I checked this morning. The stairways are lit and functioning, and the door is open. Okay. Now, that said, let me get to my duties. Maurice Edelson is the General Counsel and Senior Vice President of Corporate Development for Time Incorporated. He was named to this position in November of 2007. In this role, he manages our legal functions, corporate strategic work, and mergers and acquisition. He also oversees Time Inc.'s international licensing efforts. Previously, he served as Time Inc.'s Senior Vice President for Strategic Planning, where he was responsible for corporate strategy and mergers and acquisitions, as well as certain aspects of financial analysis and planning. He joined Strategic Planning in January of 2001 with responsibility for our mergers and acquisition work. Prior to that, he was an Assistant General Counsel in the Time Inc. Law Department, having joined that department in 1998. Before joining our company, Mr. Edelson served as corporate counsel at Viacom Inc., and prior to that, he was associated with the law firm of Cravath, Swain, and Moore. A graduate of Vassar College, Mr. Edelson holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a JD from Columbia Law School. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you my boss, Maurice Edelson.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'd like to welcome you to the Time and Life Building. Time Inc. is delighted to be hosting today's forum. It is fitting that Time Inc. is hosting a forum titled Doing Well While Doing Good. That could be part of our own corporate mission statement. I and many others are proud to work at Time Inc., where doing the right thing is part of the fabric. Once that is part of your environment, you attract employees with a similar mindset, and it becomes a self-reinforcing process. There is a long history of this kind of thing at Time Inc. Henry Luce, our co-founder, wrote in 1938, and I quote, "Time Inc. is in business for 3 reasons. First, but not in order of importance, it is in business to make money. That is to say, to provide dividends for stockholders and decent salaries for its employees. Second, it is in business to maintain and to leave behind a great and good reputation as a journalist. Third, it is in business, as is every other normal human being or decent institution, to make some contribution to the general welfare of our community." I think it is striking how these thoughts, and others expressed by Luce over the years, still animate the spirit of this company. Today, Time Inc. still strives to maintain the highest journalistic standards in all it does, and also to weave doing well into its actions and decisions. Time Inc. and its parent company, Time Warner, have a long history of promoting good works and being good corporate citizens, whether it is through informing our readers on the issues of the day, actively supporting the arts and other worthwhile causes, engaging thousands in community service programs, or by recognizing our responsibility to the environment. Today, Time Inc. is the leading and largest magazine publisher in the U.S. and one of the largest content publishers online, with brands including Time, Sports Illustrated, People, CNNMoney.com, and InStyle. Our subsidiaries, IPC and GEE, are leading publishers in the UK and in Mexico, respectively. Every month, 1 out of 2 Americans reads one of our magazines, and more than 1 out of 7 who are online visit a Time Inc. website. Here are a few examples of our current initiatives. Our Time to Read program matches employees with elementary and middle school students. Using publications such as Time for Kids and Sports Illustrated for Kids, they help improve their reading levels and develop an enthusiasm for reading. Since 2002, the company and its employees have donated more than $5 million to various organizations during our annual campaign entitled Time to Give Back. Employees have the opportunity to contribute to featured organizations or the charity of their choice. These contributions are then matched 2-for-1 by Time Inc. For 27 years, we have held the annual Andrew High School Community Service Awards, recognizing employees who have donated their personal time to community service. The Essence Music Festival, an annual concert extravaganza, returned to New Orleans last year, making a much-needed economic impact on the region and raising millions of dollars for the children of New Orleans. Also last year, editors from dozens of our titles, from Sports Illustrated to Cottage Living, visited New Orleans to do follow-up stories calling attention to how the region is and is not progressing and to what still needs to be done. And of course, Time Inc. is a leader among publishers in our sustainability efforts. We recognize our responsibility to the environment and are proud of our accomplishments in this area. We take pride in being a good corporate citizen, concerned, as Luce said, about the general welfare of our community. I am sure that many of you are doing the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhonda and Maurice. We deeply appreciate Time Inc.'s participation in our program today, and again, thank you so much. And now, I'd like to introduce Gordon Campbell, who is President and CEO of the United Way of New York City. You can see his extraordinary bio in your packets, but there are just a few highlights prior to his coming up that I would like to point out. Prior to joining the United Way in the last year or so, Gordon was an outstanding leader of Safe Horizon, a well-known victim services nonprofit in New York City. He served in a wide variety of senior government positions both in New York and in Seattle. For example, Gordon was the commissioner of the New York City Department of Homeless Services, and while he was at the city's Human Resource Administration, he created and organized the Division of AIDS Services. He has also been a prosecutor and a labor attorney. Gordon is already demonstrating his leadership qualities at the United Way of New York City. It's an organization that serves as a kind of nexus for businesses, nonprofits, and others who are partnering to make a lasting positive impact on the New York City community. We now invite him to share his unique perspective about the challenges we face in New York City and what we can learn about making positive change happen. Gordon?
Thank you, Claire, for the kind introduction. I have to tell you, although Claire's tenure at the Better Business Bureau has been relatively brief, her impact is far-reaching and the potential going forward is just so great. And I want to thank Ernst & Young for their sponsorship of today's forum and also Time Inc. And Rhonda, I don't know if it's in the air today, but also at our office they're having a fire drill this morning as well. So I thought it would be good to be here, but it doesn't matter where you are in the city. And also to be to share the dais with our partners and friends from IBM and American Express. And on behalf of United Way of New York City, it is a privilege to be part of doing well while doing good, an aspirational but achievable sentiment. And we all know that social responsibility, regardless of what sector we work in, business, nonprofit, government, is not a passing trend. At United Way, in fact, it's been part of our DNA for nearly 80 years, helping to improve the lives of those in need, strengthening communities throughout the country and beyond. Day in and day out, and I talk about the modern United Way of New York City, is committed to solving the complex problems affecting our communities year after year, decade after decade. We accomplish this by targeting three basic yet critical areas: education, income, health. And I think we would all agree that these truly are the building blocks for a better life, for advancing the common good. If you think about it, we all win when a child succeeds in school. We all win when a family is financially stable. We all win when communities have good health. Yet we recognize, and this is so important, that no single organization, or sector for that matter, can tackle these issues by itself. That's why we bring partners together from all sectors, business, nonprofit, and government, to produce community impact at a much larger and more meaningful and lasting scale. Our strategies and where we are headed, how we are evolving, includes investing in and leading community-based initiatives, rigorously evaluating, and this is so important, programs to identify best practices that can and should be taken to scale, and finally, informing public policy so that lasting systemic change can be achieved at the community level. It's encouraging then to see that corporate social responsibility increasingly is about organizations uniting to create business and community value simultaneously. Business and community value simultaneously. Essentially, leveraging each other's assets to create a win-win scenario. And this was a central theme in a groundbreaking article in Harvard Business Review in December 2006 by competitive strategy guru Michael Porter and Mark Kramer. The CSR movement has helped us all see that every business investment has the potential of creating value for shareholders, as Maurice talked about, and communities. Business and communities are truly two sides of the investment coin. A key issue today, however, facing many companies is how do I accomplish this? How do I get started? What does it mean? How do I sustain it? How can a firm get past this tension that has existed for so long between business goals and addressing social needs? I suggest that communities treat the community side of the investment coin just as they have treated the business side. Just as a business value chain includes employees, suppliers, and distributors, a company's nonprofit partners, whether through a workplace campaign, a blood drive, an advocacy effort, are part of a community value chain. After all, nonprofits are most closely connected to the needs of the community. They understand what the needs are. With business as a partner, they are capable of creating meaningful and lasting impact. Every investment, whether in a new product or an after-school program, should be considered in terms of its impact on business and community value. A compelling example of this shared value perspective is recruiting and retaining employees, i.e. talent management. In the last few years, the company's impact on the community has come to rival compensation as a top factor for prospective and current employees in their decision to join or remain with an employer. Last year, the Aspen Institute Center for Business Education surveyed nearly 2,000 MBA students from 15 business schools to gain insights about their attitudes toward the relationship between business and society. The survey revealed that 42% of today's future business leaders, compared to 34% from a similar survey conducted in 2002, more readily make the connection between good corporate citizenship and a stronger, healthier, vibrant community. 2 Sundays ago, the New York Times highlighted another key trend that emerged from the survey: the increasing percentage of college students or millennials who view the potential to make a contribution to society as an important factor when choosing a job. Not surprisingly, of the top 10 factors offered, the top 3 were typically conventional, not only for college graduates, but probably for all of us. Challenging and diverse job responsibilities, compensation, and work-life balance. Ranking 4th, however, was the potential to make a contribution to society. It's worth noting that 26% consider this factor important, compared to just 15% in 2002. But it's not just the younger generation of future business leaders that is looking for a greater interdependence between the business and social worlds. A 2007 Cone research report revealed that 72% of Americans want their employers to do more to support a cause or a social issue. Just 4 years ago, that number was 52%. I'm so pleased that we're going to be joined today by the Grand Dame of CSR, Carol Cone. So don't think of your employees' volunteer program as, quote, nice to do once a year. Rather, look at it as a critical investment in getting and keeping, retaining the best employees, and in maximizing your return on a key and core investment. I'd like to give you an example of this partnership can benefit both a business as well as a nonprofit and create impact that strengthens an entire community rather than just a few individuals and families, and not to minimize those individuals and families, but think of the potential if you can reach well beyond. The Bank of New York Mellon has a long-standing tradition of partnership with United Way. In 2007 alone, its employees contributed an incredible $7 million to United Way. And their employee engagement is involved up and down and throughout the ranks. And I have to tell you, the bank could have rested on their laurels, but they didn't. 3 years ago, we at United Way of New York City were in the process of launching our Housing Help Program, the nation's first court-based eviction program. Housing Help was developed, and listen to these numbers, because each year 350,000 petitions for non-payment of rent are filed in New York City's housing court, resulting in more than 23,000 evictions. In a city with a minimal supply of affordable apartments, an eviction notice can represent a one-way ticket to the shelter system. Housing Help provides integrated legal, social, and financial services to both stop the immediate threat of eviction, but even more important, to prevent future homelessness by addressing the underlying cause of the family's oftentimes precarious and perilous situation. The bank recognized that Housing Help program aligned neatly with their culture and core values promoted through their corporate social responsibility commitments. One of these commitments is to drive corporate philanthropy that advances quality of life where their employees and clients work, live, and do business. They saw that this unique pilot program had the capability of creating true community impact rather than just simply putting a Band-Aid on the complex problem of homelessness. And from a basic CSR standpoint, it provided and continues to provide for them excellent access to the community. So they made a strategic decision to invest $500,000 over 2 years to become the primary corporate sponsor. And I should add, other foundations, Mizuho and Booth Ferris, have joined up as well. And the results are astonishing. Since 2005, the program has helped more than 1,000 families in the Bronx to keep their homes and avoid the shelter system. And I might add that it saved taxpayers millions of dollars. It costs less than $3,000 to serve a family through the Housing Help program. And you know what it costs to house a family in the New York City shelter system? $32,000 on average. Based on the pilot's success, the New York City Department of Homeless Services is now partnering with United Way to expand the Housing Help program this month into Brooklyn and anticipate taking it citywide over the next 6 months. And I might add that evaluation metrics, the bottom line outcomes, have and continue to be critical to the equation. Recognizing the potential for broad community impact, the bank invested another $500,000 over 2 years. All of this is being watched closely, not only here in New York, but by cities around the country as an innovative and effective approach to address an all too persistent and pervasive problem. And I have to tell you, none of this could have been accomplished on such a scale without such a robust and vibrant partnership. And indeed, the Bank of New York Mellon could have stopped there. Instead, they're working with United Way to take their corporate citizenship to the next level through a company-wide strategic initiative that offers employees the opportunity to give, to volunteer, to advocate on behalf of their neighbors in need. Ultimately, the bank, with its vast financial resources and human capital, could have tried to set their own course. but we are pleased that they recognize our connection to and expertise in the community to help them realize one of their CSR goals. And today their employees, their clients, their partners, their shareholders, and the general public see that they are an active, meaningful, and serious player in the community. Speaking of employees, a 2007 McKinsey Global Survey in Corporate Philanthropy asked respondents to identify which business goals their companies try to reach through their corporate philanthropic programs in addition to social benefits. While enhancing corporate reputation and brand, not surprisingly, topped the list, this was followed by building employee and or leadership capabilities and skills and improving employee recruitment and or retention. It's no secret that a vast majority of today's corporate employees believe that companies should use volunteering as a professional development tool. Some of you may have seen the article in last week's Wall Street Journal entitled, "The Latest Office Perk, Getting Paid to Volunteer," which confirmed that an increasing number of companies are aligning themselves with volunteer opportunities that tap into their employees' skills, that tap into their employees' career goals. Indeed, the days of viewing volunteerism as a one-off team-building excursion to a local school to paint a wall, although important, is dated. The desire to make a lasting impact in the community has and continues to take hold. Companies are looking to nonprofits that they have relationships with to help make this happen. And we as nonprofits need more than ever to bring volunteer opportunities of value to the table. Last week, President Bush celebrated National Volunteer Week at the White House by recognizing Deloitte for its leadership and commitment to workplace volunteering. The company has fostered a strong culture of community involvement that encourages its people to help nonprofit organizations function more effectively, which is exactly what they do on the private sector side of the house. For example, on June 6th, Deloitte is hosting Impact Day, the organization's 9th annual celebration of volunteer services. Many of the events that take place enable Deloitte's 40,000 employees to volunteer their business skills to nonprofits in their communities. Or I just read yesterday about a young woman who went to Brazil in a small town for a 3-month sabbatical, but not a sabbatical, to really help a startup firm to get their accounting practices and financial house in order. And at United Way, another example of getting employees to utilize their professional skills in a volunteer setting can be found in our Money Up initiative. And Money Up initiative, which was launched 3 months ago at 3 locations in the city, was made possible with major support from J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America. Money Up targets low-income New Yorkers seeking free income tax preparation and help for applying and receiving the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, which all too often goes uncollected. And let me tell you how it works. After assisting clients with their taxes, volunteers from United Way's corporate partners help clients reduce debt and begin to accumulate savings by providing year-round financial coaching and legal counseling related to their finances at no cost. And these are just 2 examples of community engagement that go well beyond individual personal rewards and the quaint notion of business giving back. Ultimately, they provide, if you think about it, they provide a general triple win for the business sector and its employees seeking meaningful engagement in the community, for the nonprofit sector and its community-based organizations seeking the knowledge and expertise of skilled professionals, and most importantly, I believe, for the community and its residents for all too long saying, we need help, we need to do things differently, we need to think outside the box, and change is indeed possible. And so, doing well by doing good. This can't just be about image. It has to be about substance. It must be about substance. And as Claire talked about, it must start with trust. This cannot be about self-interest. Instead, it requires creating shared values through strong, robust, and creative partnerships. And this cannot just be about the next set of quarterly returns. Rather, it must keep its eye firmly on the future. Porter and Kramer emphasized that companies and other sectors must stop thinking in terms of corporate social responsibility and start thinking in terms of corporate social integration. I would challenge all of us to continue looking at both sides of the investment coin, business and community value creation. Only then can we truly be doing good while doing well. Only then can we reach our full potential to advance the common good. Thank you. Do people have any questions or cards? But it doesn't even necessarily have to be a card. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. That was wonderful. At first, when we thought about having, we started seeing who was responding to our invitation for today, and we started seeing a real mix of philanthropy as well as business, and it seemed like a natural to have you speak. So I'm so thrilled that you could be with us. Thank you for that. It's now my privilege to introduce our featured speaker for today, Mr. George Poley of IBM. Again, when we put that topic together of doing well while doing good, and we came across the study that George Poley and his partner did, which I'll get into in a minute, again, we thought, it's meant to be. So I'm so glad you could make it. George Poley is an IBM vice president and a senior partner in IBM's Global Business Services Group. He is the global leader of the business strategy consulting practice and the financial services sector's strategy and change consulting practice, bringing over 20 years of consulting, high-tech, communications, and media, as well as entertainment industry experience. He held strategic and operational roles in both entrepreneurial endeavors and in large corporations. The IBM strategy consulting practice works with senior business executives to design strategies to improve business performance. Before joining IBM in 2001, he was an executive at Mainspring, which is a strategy consulting boutique, Lucent Technologies, and Gemini Consulting. And just a few months ago, as I mentioned, George, along with his co-author, Jeff Hittner, who I believe is with us today. I think I saw George earlier. Basically they published a fascinating IBM Institute for Business Value report entitled Attaining Sustainable Growth Through Corporate Social Responsibility. Perfect. George is here today to tell us about their findings. Let's welcome George Poley to the podium.
Thank you, Claire, and good morning, everybody. After going through that long-winded canned bio, I'm not sure if you understand what it is that I do, so I'll try to encapsulate it pretty quickly here. I'm a consultant, a management consultant. My clients are typically C-level executives or senior executives at the operational level at multiple clients. I primarily focus on financial services nowadays, but I've served many different clients in many different industries over time. So the question is, why am I here to talk about corporate social responsibility? Why is an IBM guy here to talk about this? Well, IBM, for the reason that we have this practice within our consulting services group that does focus on CSR. We haven't yet established a formal practice around it, but what we're doing is we're tapping into a number of the existing skills and capabilities in our organization to offer, I'd say, new services to our clients that are interested in CSR-oriented topics, everything from supply chain management, impacting green and the environment, through opportunities to redefine the corporate strategy and redefine the corporate agenda around issues related to CSR, things from labor management, labor standards management, globalization, et cetera. So what I want to do with you today is to really talk through a couple of things. One is that we're actually launching today our Global CEO Study, which is something that we do uniquely. We talk to 1,100 CEOs face-to-face, and just today we're announcing the results. Our CEO is doing that in London. In fact, I think he's probably already done it a few hours ago, given the time lag. But want to talk about that. Want to talk about this study that we did specific to CSR, which is a study that we did not in conjunction with the individuals who are responsible for corporate citizenship within corporations, but rather with business executives. And we wanted to get the essence of what they were thinking about CSR as opposed to what the folks who were tasked with CSR as a part of their day-to-day job were thinking about. So I'll go through the results in both those areas, but I'd like to start out with a question. We talked about the thought leadership that came out in Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago. How many of you think that CSR is a new topic? Excellent. So we won't have to do a lot of remedial education here. The key issue to remember is that one of the reasons why CSR has become an important agenda item nowadays is because of, frankly, technology. If you remember back pre the Industrial Revolution, most businesses were local businesses. Transportation systems didn't exist, so therefore it was very difficult to move products from one place to another. So as a result, most businesses were local. And you knew that if you were upsetting people in your community, that they were upset and it would have a direct impact on your business. Once businesses started to grow exponentially and now globally, they have a footprint everywhere. And it's very difficult for constituents of any kind to be able to come back and influence the policies of the company based upon their own feelings about what it is that the company is doing, either positively or negatively. The Internet changed that. The Internet allows communities to be formed very rapidly. It allows communities to share information about what companies are doing very rapidly. And at the end of the day, it impacts a company's ability to manage its own brand. So that's one of the key drivers of what's happened with CSR, to take it from what it used to be, which was an aspect of the way that business was run fundamentally, because it impacted you and your neighbors, to the point where now it is becoming the same sort of an issue with respect to how CSR impacts strategy. The other thing that was a significant contributor to CSR disappearing, in essence, from the corporate agenda for many years was the fact that corporations were established, and corporations took the liability from the people running the company and the liability for those people with regard to the ways that they impacted society away from the individuals. Right? So it was no longer the case where, as a business executive, I was feeling compelled to do the right thing because I was no longer personally responsible for it. So that had a direct impact on the ability for corporations to feel the need to be socially responsible. So when you combine that with the fact that these companies were growing globally, they had much less direct control of what they were doing in every location or across multiple locations. What you saw over the course of many years was a decline in the amount of responsibility that corporations were feeling for the CSR agenda. Emergence of the Internet, all of a sudden it's much easier for the global community to feel like a single community again. So all of a sudden you become, as an executive, much more sensitive and much more able to see the impact of what it is that you're doing, whether it's within your local community or within the global community. So that's one of the key drivers of what it is that companies are thinking through right now. So I went to business school many years ago, and one of the key things that I was taught was that you can't just think about shareholder value. However, coming out of an MBA program, that is the primary objective as a business executive, is to create shareholder value. And the head fake was towards, yes, and you also have to do all these other things that deal with the needs and interests of other constituents, but at the end of the day, it's about creating shareholder value. Well, things have changed quite a bit since I was in business school. I think Gordon pointed to the fact that many employees are looking for companies who have some level of significant corporate social responsibility and a solid reputation in the marketplace. They're using that as a selection criteria. So obviously things are changing pretty significantly from even 20 years ago, when most students graduating from MBA programs didn't really think that hard about the reputation of the companies that they're going to work for. So let me jump right into some of the material here. We talked to, as I mentioned earlier, 1,100 CEOs globally. This is brand new information. What we asked them about was, what are the factors that are causing them to readjust or adjust their corporate strategies and adjust the way in which they're investing in their businesses? The factor that historically has been the most significant actually disappeared this year from level of importance. And that was marketplace factors, factors relating directly to the competitive environment in which these business executives were operating. So environmental issues grew the most. So socioeconomic factors relate, and in particular here, what we're talking about is the disparity between rich and poor, and then people and skill management, mostly relating to employees and the availability of appropriate skills to deal with the global marketplace. Those are the three things that these business executives told us were the key drivers of the way that they were evaluating investments and decisions about their corporate strategy, right? This picture did not look like this 2 years ago when we did the study in 2006. Marketplace factors had always held the top spot and continues to be a significant issue, but these factors are the ones that are the most rapidly growing. A couple of other interesting learnings from the study. We expected the fact that CSR was having a growing impact on business to actually challenge CEOs. But what we found is that they're not pessimistic or dubious about this at all. They're highly optimistic that CSR has very positive implications for their organizations. And why is that? It's because it's a new dimension that they can use to differentiate their products and services. If you can get into a marketplace where the consumer, whether it's a direct consumer or the business customer, cares and makes decisions based upon your CSR performance, and you're a leader in CSR, then all of a sudden you have a new dimension upon which you can differentiate what it is you're doing in the marketplace. A significant opportunity from the perspective of most CEOs. It's always difficult to find ways to stand out from the crowd. They're really looking at CSR as a key dimension for where they can start to differentiate in some new ways. And then secondly, they're backing that up with a shift in investment. So basically what they used to do is invest around 10.7% of their investment in CSR-oriented issues. They're expecting to grow that by about 25%. Again, of all of the different areas in their businesses that we asked them about, this is the area that grew the fastest. And the expectation is that it's going to continue to grow pretty significantly. So CSR at its core is really about addressing the needs of multiple constituencies. So consumers obviously get impacted directly by the products and services you sell to them. NGOs are having a much more visible impact on business because they are the ones that are now starting to aggregate issues and information about the ways that companies operate. Community and government, those are two linked together mainly because we're talking about the ability for local communities, local government, and federal level government, and even now cross-country government agencies to start to regulate some of the aspects of corporate social responsibility. So, for example, the UK is starting to establish some very specific carbon emissions regulations that will directly impact not just the retailers in the UK, but all of the upstream partners and consumer packaged goods companies that want to sell their products through those retail chains like Marks and Spencer's and Tesco's. So you know as soon as there's a significant amount of direct regulation in the retail industry, it's going to have a ripple effect all the way back upstream within that industry's or multiple industries' value chains. So the community issue and the government and regulation issue is a very significant one. We talked a little bit already about employees and the importance of attracting the best and the brightest, and in particular, this being CSR in particular being an opportunity to really differentiate yourself with respect to those employees and the decisions they're making. Business partners, a lot of companies are now starting to work with their suppliers and with their distribution channels to put together more effective CSR policies. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And then lastly, investors. You can't escape them. Many companies are publicly traded. Investors really determine the value that you create within your own organization. At the end of the day, you still have to report to them, and their decisions are important. So a couple of things. Why is this all of a sudden, besides the fact that the internet allows different individuals or organizations to start to put pressure on companies, what else is happening out there? Well, these are the results of a number of different surveys, but 25% of consumers have said that they would switch their brand loyalty on consumer product companies to another brand if they were aware that a socially responsible brand or a more socially responsible brand was available, right? So this says that in many cases, about a quarter of consumer packaged goods companies' business could be taken away if a different provider started to put together a value proposition that included some aspect of corporate social responsibility. Now, if you're a Procter & Gamble, CEO of Procter & Gamble will look at this number and say, geez, if somebody does figure out a way to do this and to differentiate themselves with regard to whether it's detergent or plastic bags or whatever it happens to be, I've got a lot to lose, right? The board of Procter & Gamble will look at this and say, gosh, if somebody figures this out, we've got a lot to lose, and we're going to have to change our management team because they're not the ones who are going to necessarily figure this out if we do suffer this sort of a loss. Workforce, we talked about that already. 41%, and this is the company's perspective, not the individual's perspective. 41% of the companies we talked to actually believe that they have a severe shortage in skills and capabilities. And this is not, by the way, just a local issue. This is a global issue, especially for the large global companies. They're having problems finding people in China. They're having problems finding people in India, et cetera. Even though you keep hearing that there's an overabundance of skills in those areas, there's still really significant gaps in companies' ability to attract the best local talent. 50% of shareholder initiatives in 2006 were related to CSR. That's a big deal. But what that means is that the discussions at the board level were on CSR topics, right? So all of the things that the shareholders were voting on, 50% of those things had something to do with the company's CSR policies. And then business partners, 50% of businesses today are already experiencing upstream pressure to do something. So, for example, Walmart is pressuring its suppliers to take a much more aggressive stance in the way that they package their products to start to surface and make very obvious the carbon footprint that those products have, et cetera. Same thing is happening globally. In fact, Walmart has been one of the leaders in this area in the U.S. When we talked to global business execs for the survey that we conducted, their view was that the U.S. was pretty far behind in most of these areas, and in particular in green. But what we discovered when we conducted the survey was that while the U.S. was further behind in green, across all of the other dimensions of CSR, whether that's community relations or whether it's corporate giving or whether it has to do with labor standards, actually the U.S. executives were no different than the global executives. For some reason on this one topic of green, the U.S. executives are a little bit further behind. I think still have a little bit of realization to go through to figure out what the key issue is. So at the end of the day, these execs are looking at a few different issues. One, CSR in many cases is giving them the opportunity and the permission to operate. Most of my clients are very large companies. When they want to go after a new market, they're typically looking at going into Brazil, or they're typically looking at going into Chile. Now, when the governments of Brazil and Chile start to mandate that a company coming into the country has to perform certain aspects of either green management or labor management issues, these companies are now paying very close attention to these issues because from a regulatory perspective, it either will prevent them or allow them to generate whole new sets of revenue streams, right? So there's a direct connection between their ability to be responsive on CSR issues and to demonstrate a quality brand image related to CSR and their ability to grow their businesses. So there is no better coincidence when you talk about corporate issues versus societal issues of how those two things come together. So the time is right for a lot of this. We talked about the opportunity that CEOs see for competitive differentiation. And the last point, again, about talent. The funny thing about the talent issue is that almost every business executive we talked to brought this up proactively. So it's not sort of a casual reference to the fact that it's hard to find good people. They see this as a significant obstacle to growth. And this, they believe, can be a very critical differentiator in the way that they create a strong employment proposition to potential employees. So what are the three different areas where we think there are opportunities for businesses? Okay, so if you're a non-for-profit and you want to work with businesses, this is from the business perspective what the opportunity is. So the first is from cost to growth, second is from visibility to transparency, and then third is from containment to engagement. We had a hard time when we started speaking with executives about what exactly was CSR. We discovered through those conversations that there was a pretty broad continuum of what companies considered CSR-oriented initiatives. So everything from legal and compliance issues, which gives you permission to basically operate the company. If you break the law, you can be shut down, right? Strategic philanthropy is those areas where companies are either giving money away that they hope at some point will impact their brand image or reputation or have a positive impact on society in some way. What we also noticed were that there are a number of companies, and IBM is one of these, that actually has values-based self-regulation, meaning you comply with the law, but in many cases you go beyond what the law requires of you simply because you believe it's the right thing to do, right? For us, that's a corporate value. You talked about the other speaker that was here earlier, I guess he's left, mentioned the fact that Time has a number of different corporate principles and corporate values that have been built into the company since its initiation. It's the same sort of a principle where you certainly comply with the law, but you go beyond that where you think it's important to simply because that's the way that the company works. Then the surprising areas that we found, and I'll say a little bit more about this in just a second, companies are looking at CSR as ways to drive efficiency and revenue growth. All right? Again, when you start to match up economic contribution on the part of the corporation with the ability to impact society, that's where we're seeing and they're seeing the biggest opportunity for change. All right? All the other aspects of CSR are important, have to be in place, can make very positive contribution, but as soon as you can start to flip these toggle switches on efficiency, is it there? Can you drive some with what it is you're trying to do, whether it's in the green space or not? And by the way, the most clear opportunities right now seem to be in green. Everything as simple as, replacing the light bulbs here with fluorescence, right? You have to lay out money to do it, but it pays back very quickly, and it immediately creates a very strong perception in the marketplace that you're doing something important, right? To the growth platforms where we see the kind of the least amount of current attention, but the most growth in focus. So we talked to the business execs about where they were already spending money and where they were now starting to spend money. And this just goes back, recently started means a couple of years ago. So what you see by this is that compliance with regulations, most companies are pretty much doing that. There's a lot of strategic philanthropy going on, although the pretty significant amount of recent growth there. And what we were shocked at is the level to which companies were addressing cost savings opportunities and creating new revenue streams. So creating revenue streams to me was the most shocking of all. 68% of companies said they're now looking at CSR initiatives as a vehicle to create new revenue. All right? And, mostly 50% of those guys, 49% of them said, we only started doing that in the last couple of years, right? Because they previously didn't really have a lot of visibility into what those kinds of opportunities might be. And this again links back to this issue that the CEOs have about what are the key areas of potential differentiation that CSR offers to our corporation. So pretty significant finding from our perspective, especially with respect to how much momentum all of these issues are gaining in the most recent past. Funny thing is that 68% of companies see that there are new revenue streams available, but 76% of those companies haven't really gotten any sense of what it is that their customers are looking for. Now, I remember in my professional history one time when this happened before, and that's when the Internet started to become popular. And back in 98, 99, I had a number of clients who I was consulting with. Funny, some of them were in the technology services industry. And I remember being at one board meeting, and we were talking about the impact of the Internet, the potential future of the Internet, and the board members agreed that the Internet was a fad. Okay? They decided they were not going to invest at all. You know what the big thing is in IT services? It's Y2K. They focused all their investment and energy on Y2K. Y2K happened. None of the lights went out. None of the things that we were promised would certainly happen really happened. And the company was stuck. They didn't have a growth platform, and it was too late for them to catch up. with the rest of the world having gone down the path of starting to experiment and drive new opportunities through the internet. So to me, what I'm seeing here with this data is a very strong level of interest on the part of business executives, a keen desire to start doing something which they've started to do, but a lack of understanding as to what it's really going to take to be successful. Right? So when it comes to implications for my industry, we're thinking about how can we adapt technology more effectively to go after an understanding of what customers are looking for. How can we do a better job of surfacing the current operations of a business? How do you get data about the way that companies operate? What kinds of services can we provide to help corporations become more savvy about what it is that their customers are looking for? And by the way, it's not just customers, it's all those other constituents I talked about earlier. So if you are an NGO or if you're a non-for-profit organization, what you need to be helping companies do is think through what it is that both your organization and the constituents that you represent need. Right? Companies don't know what people are looking for, and they haven't been very aggressive yet about going after them. But they're starting to spend money, as the previous slide showed. So this is exactly what happened at the beginning of the internet. Everybody put up websites. They spent literally millions and millions of dollars on technology, on consulting services to build their websites. And at the end of the day, they had no idea what the impact was going to be. The same thing is happening in this domain right now. Right? So what's needed on the part of business executives is a better understanding of what it is you are looking for and what your constituents are looking for. And in order to more effectively spend that money, the 25% increase that I talked about earlier, to more effectively spend that money in ways that will be productive to the business. The worst thing that can happen to CSR is that if companies spend all this money and get no results from it. Right? That's why this coincidence of driving new revenues, driving cost savings, increasing investment has to be coupled with an improvement in this number here of what companies really understand are the needs of their customers and other constituents. When that happens, there will be better decision making, and the investments will have a net impact. Visibility, transparency. I'm just looking at the time here. There are, as you know, there are so many different vehicles that individuals or NGOs or communities can use to impact the way that businesses operate nowadays. Rainforest Action Network can theoretically, within 30 minutes, take a picture of any company that's doing illegal logging, put it on the web, digital photography, of course, put it on the web, broadcast it to literally tens of thousands of participants in the network, and those participants can immediately start to pressure companies and government organizations about illegal logging. All right, and this is particular to rainforests. So these people are located, mostly in Central America. But the fact that they can very quickly identify, post, and influence, literally within the span of a couple of hours, in an incident that's taking place in Brazil, is pretty significant in terms of a very small organization's ability to impact corporate policy and to impact political policy. Xiamen, China, there was a local company was going to build a chemical plant by using mobile devices and SMSs, if you can believe this. 100,000 people were able to organize themselves within the span of 2 days to do a show of support for blocking the chemical company to build the plant because they were dubious of the company's plans to remediate an existing facility, but also to curb some of the effluents that were expected to come out of this plant. And they were able to get the local government within that time span to really shut down the effort until the company provided much better input. And then there's all kinds of other examples. I mean, Brand X, you think about fast food industry and obesity. There are so many different ways and so many different issues for companies to be influenced and directly impacted, even on issues that might seem, like issues associated with a very small fraction of their consumers or with a very small fraction of the population. So the internet and other technologies are giving organizations the voice and the impact that they could never have before. So this is why we're returning to kind of that old local community pre-industrial revolution. It's happening because the internet and these technologies allow people to come together almost in the way, you could argue, that they could way back when before the industrial revolution hit. And by the way, 100,000 new citizen groups since 1990 is a lot. Customers are also paying much more attention, and this is just one data point here. Almost 60% of UK and US customers are trying aggressively to learn more about what it is that they're buying. So they're not just reading the labels for fat content. They also want to know a little bit more about whether the product is in a recyclable package, and you can usually tell because there's a label on there if it's plastic. They want to know if the packaging material itself comes from recycled materials. They want to know a lot about everything associated with the product or service that you're providing them. And they're becoming much more aggressive about it. Because there are so many different avenues now to impact a company, the amount of information that different individuals have, because it can be transmitted so quickly, means that the company is much more exposed in terms of how it operates. Anything you do can be discovered. And because of that, every company's got to put in place some sort of a strategy of transparency. The question is not just what do you want to prevent from being discovered and then react in a very defensive way once it is. But if you turn the tables and become much more transparent about the way that you operate and start to use the support network that you have in many NGOs, you can completely change the equation of what it is that you're doing. So an example here would be Nike. You probably all remember the fact that they were using child labor in some of their suppliers' manufacturing locations in Vietnam a number of years ago. What they decided to do was to make available the list of all of their suppliers to NGOs, so that the NGOs, if they felt compelled to check out these suppliers to see whether there was any labor management infringements at those companies, they could go do that. And Nike said, look, you can have the information about where we're operating. You're free to go check it out. If you find a problem, tell us and we'll fix it. Right? That's a completely different stance than if the NGO is always trying to discover what you're doing wrong. Once they find something, you're defensive about it. You spend a ton of money on inappropriate PR. You try to greenwash something, and literally those efforts typically fall apart. So transparency strategies really have to go hand in hand with changing the way that you operate the business at the same time as you're wise and strategic about the way that you share information with different constituencies. Okay? And that's where the real opportunity here is to change this exposure issue into a transparency strategy that then in turn helps the company. So it would be great that if you don't have to hire your own people to go look at these plants, why not use the folks that make up an NGO who are going to go do it anyway to do the work for you? Right? You just cut your costs. So a lot of these issues have to be thought through a little creatively to come up with the business opportunity, but there's business opportunity there. So again, what we find is, companies believe they have sufficient information to give to the customers about their products, but the funny thing is, again, most of these companies haven't talked to their customers about what it is they actually want or want to know about. So it's not good enough with a transparency strategy just to tell everybody everything, because that's really not what you're trying to achieve. What you need to do is on a constituent by constituent basis is figure out what is it that's important for them to know. What do they need to know? What's their issue? And what is it that we can share with them, and what are the other steps we need to take in order to make sure that once they have this information, we can work collaboratively to sort out any issues that come up. So this whole issue of containment. In most companies, PR is responsible for talking with the press. Investor relations is responsible for talking with investors. Marketing is responsible for talking with consumers. The reality is that with the way in which supply chains now work and the fact that people actually now care about the packaging, you can't explicitly limit their connection with the company to the more traditional interaction models. So if they want to know about how it is you manufacture things, you may need to share more information with them about how your plants run, and therefore give some of those people who are that interested access to information about the plants. And in fact, why not even create a community of interest around the way that you manage those plants? Tap some people who are both consumers and maybe industrial engineers to give you ideas about things that you could be doing differently. Right? Not necessarily brand new ideas, but certainly ideas where you can start to see the confluence of a CSR focus combined with the ability to impact business operations. And that's where the real opportunity is. The other interesting aspect of the opportunity is the fact that most of the executives we spoke with think that CSR is being driven from the top, right? I actually expected the opposite. I expected that employees were the ones who are much more aggressively managing and driving a lot of the initiatives in most corporations. But the reality is that it's just the opposite. And most of these executives have not engaged their employees to drive their CSR efforts. And they haven't certainly reached outside of their employees to their employees' families to engage in CSR efforts. But there's a huge opportunity there from a mobilization perspective to get the CSR agenda going in the corporation. If the employees aren't bought into a CSR agenda, then it's probably going to be very difficult to expect those employees who are the ones interfacing with the NGOs or the ones interfacing with the press or the ones running the folks running the plant that makes the product that the consumers are buying to feel any interest in it. So as with everything in management, getting the people in the organization to be mobilized on the issue is one of the most important factors that came out of this study as it relates to the relationship between the business executives that think they've got all the great ideas to connecting that with how it's actually going to get done sort of in the field. And the funny thing is that, if you look at this, actually a rounding number here, 16% of companies say they collaborate and really engage with their customers on CSR. That relates to the second bar up, where it says 17%. So what we found was that companies who are good at engaging are typically good at engaging everybody, right? And those are the dark blue bars that you see. And by the way, the 17% under customers is the average. So that means that the companies who are not good at engaging are even worse than that, right? They're down in the single digits. So there actually is a pretty stark contrast between companies that kind of get this level of engagement that's required on CSR and companies that don't get it. And the ones that are getting it are the ones that felt much more comfortable telling us about the things that they're doing and the fact that these initiatives in the CSR domain were having a very positive impact on their business. All right? So this the transparency issue then moving towards how you start to engage everybody, whether it's your customers or your employees and the other constituents, is really a key driver of how you need to establish a CSR policy. Again, looking at the world through a business executive's lens. A couple of examples here are 3M and Starbucks. 3M has a program in place where they've, for many years, rewarded employees for finding reductions in effluents from new products that get developed. So not just developing the product, but changing the way that the product gets manufactured so that they can both reduce cost and effluents. I think they've saved over $1 billion a year in those kinds of initiatives. Starbucks has some very similar customer engagement mechanisms where they use the internet because of, there's a Starbucks everywhere, so you've got to be able to synthesize and gather all that input. They've got some things that they're doing there, but they're doing some very interesting things with respect to free trade and the way that they are supporting local communities of coffee bean growers in Latin America as well. So they're, I'd say, one of the leaders in terms of CSR. The funny thing is that a lot of people don't know that. But just like in every situation, there are certain very loyal consumers. One of my colleagues I talked to about Starbucks, and she rattled off all this stuff that Starbucks was doing with respect to CSR. I had no idea. But she will never buy anybody else's coffee because she is so in awe of what this company is doing to impact society that they built a solid brand with her for life. So that's the end of the story. Again, think about CSR moving from a cost issue to a growth opportunity. Think about moving from a company's exposure and visibility to transparency, and then containing information, containing engagement, to really engaging a much broader set of constituents. So if you want to do some Q&A. Yep. Right.
Everybody hear me?
Yeah.
decades ago.
Right.
How much do you want to reveal about your company's history? Could you open some major doors that could be problematic?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, at the end of the day, the times they are changing, right? I mean, you need to, as an executive team in a business, and I'll talk about what I would say to a client here, right? The question is this: if you know that you're going to get scrutinized because there is a regulatory issue that's creeping up on you, meaning that if you know that there are certain effluents that are becoming much more sensitive, and you know that you had a plant 20 years ago that was making this stuff, you know they're going to, you know that the regulators are going to catch up with you sometime. If it's a moral issue, then I think it's up to the management team to make that decision. But the criteria by which they have to make that decision are twofold. One is, what does it mean to the company and its employees, and what does that look like, right? What is the impact of a decision, and then what is the impact on broader society, and the impact that would have on our intangible asset that we call brand and our revenue generation opportunities. And you know, unfortunately, I can't give you a single answer to this. It really depends on what the issue is, right? Because to some degree, the values of the corporation need to drive what the corporation does. But by the same token, it's rare that the corporate executive team is going to put the company out of business on a moral issue, right? However, there are usually many vehicles that you can use to make progress on a topic, even if that means, if it costs money to remediate or costs money to fix the problem, doing so over a number of years, right? Where you acknowledge it, you realize it's a problem, and then you start to find a way to make it work, right? So there's usually a middle ground that works for everybody. Well, I think to some degree that stuff is out there, right? You read it, right? So it's already out there. The question is, there's an interesting concept that I've read about where it's really about public relations management to some degree, because what you're trying to get a sense of is the level of outrage that the issue engenders in people. At the end of the day, it might really upset one person, but it may not actually be a significant enough issue for the management team to worry about. And that's a qualitative assessment you've got to make. Oh. Yep.
So could you talk a little bit about IBM itself in terms of CSR for the revenue streams, and excluding K-12 or green stuff, which is kind of obvious? Is IBM doing anything interesting in that respect?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we try to do as an organization. We're probably 370,000 people globally. What we've found is that when we get a lot of bright minds together somehow, and we can't obviously do it all in person because we'd swamp any convention town on earth, I think. But what we have always tried to do is to engage our employees, and we do this thing called a jam, which is where we literally online we'll organize a number of different topics and then have employees contribute at will to their ideas about the topic. And we conducted a jam last year that was entitled the Innovation Jam, where we were looking for opportunities for more generic business growth, but we also had a number of topics that were CSR oriented. We went through, and this took a number of months to do, but we kind of surfaced the biggest and the best idea opportunities in the domain of CSR, and Sam, our CEO, committed $100 million in funding to, in essence, create new business opportunities behind those ideas. So we used it as a kind of a virtual, either a think tank or an idea generation vehicle. And those projects today are being invested in. There are teams working on them. They are developing new products and new services, and they're starting to take those to market. So the expectation is that they're going to turn into profitable new revenue streams for us. I mean, I was just
wondering what kinds of areas are there outside of...
I'll give you one example. We have long been present in the financial services industry as a pretty critical player in back office computation systems. We did a series of workshops in Africa over the span of, say, from about 6 months ago to 18 months before that. And what we were trying to understand is what were some of the things holding back the African economy. The whole notion of microfinance was pretty prevalent at the time. We dug into it more deeply. What we figured out was that some of the key cost drivers that were inhibiting banks from entering the local market to provide infrastructure support for transactions were the IT systems. And the fact that it was prohibitive for any one organization to build the infrastructure necessary to provide microfinance to local communities in Africa, right? So, and whether that was to support small businesses or women-driven businesses, we saw that there was an opportunity there, so we partnered with CARE, who you're all familiar with, or maybe even somebody from CARE is here, to develop what we're calling an infrastructure hub, a microfinance hub that we're rolling out in Africa. We're working with CARE in Africa, but we're also providing the same sort of a idea, concept, and capability in other emerging markets as well. So that's an example of where we see opportunity. Now, we're going to make money from it, right? And you might say, well, wouldn't this be something that you would have done anyway? I'll tell you, being in our financial services industry leadership team, we would have never really thought about that as an opportunity unless we kind of use this lens of CSR, right? So that's one of the key reasons why this is different. This is not about just doing day-to-day business. This is about changing the way you think about what your day-to-day business is, and that's where we found the most value. All right. Okay. I hope so. I need some eye surgery or something. Okay, this one is, you equate CSR to the internet boom of the late 90s. What can companies do to avoid a similar bubble burst? I'm afraid there probably will be a bubble. I think that the challenge is, and this is something that I pointed out earlier in the slides, a bubble typically happens when people start to spend money before they actually have any idea what they're really doing, right? And they know when the investment seems a little iffy because they're not quite sure whether or not the fundamentals of the economics of what they're doing really support it. And I'll tell you that unless these companies that have more recently started to get on the bandwagon of across the whole CSR value curve that I put up there, and especially on the revenue and the cost side, unless they're really understanding what it is they're going to drive from these investments, there will be a bubble. So getting that understanding of what it is that the market wants and being sensitive to the needs of all the constituencies and putting a strategy together and then investing is the only way that you'll avoid the bubble. Otherwise, the bubble will happen. What are the budget holders within corporations for CSR? Who are the budget holders within corporations for CSR investments? And then, as a non-for-profit and as a non-profit potential partner, who should I be ready to? Who should I be reaching out to? Reaching out to. Even the glasses don't help. It's kind of interesting because in many corporations, ours included, we have somebody that is tasked with corporate responsibility. I think it's certainly appropriate to be reaching out to those individuals, not only because that's their primary concern, but they're going to be able to offer you the best network to the rest of the company where the greatest amount of imaginative and creative and innovative new opportunities could exist. What I would suggest to you is that just like in my business, if I walk in the door to a client and say, well, tell me what you need help with and tell me what you want me to do, they're going to kick me out because they don't even know in many cases what I can help them with. So once you've established a connection with corporate responsibility group or individual, if there is one, is find the person in the company that you think you've got the greatest direct value proposition for and be very specific about what it is. I've been associated with many non-for-profits as a board member in the past, and it's amazing how inarticulate most of the even the senior leaders of the organization are in describing the value proposition that they bring to different constituents. Right? So the point here is that if you walk in the door and you say, here's the way that we think you can make an opportunity out of X, Y, or Z issue, chances are they've never even thought about it that way. And the best way to engage them is to bring them the idea, not just to kind of walk in there and say, well, what can we do to help? So that would be my counsel on that. It's no different than, consulting services. It's just I think you're doing it from a different perspective. And by the way, one of the reasons why we're working with CARE in Africa is not because we don't have consultants in Africa. We just don't have enough consultants in Africa. And the way that the CARE folks have been operating there is, strangely enough, I was kind of surprised at this. They come at the issue from a consultative perspective. So either there's some ex-consultants or services people that now work in CARE and they've counseled the local constituents. How do you actually go talk to and engage the local government or the local business? They're kind of taking a much more professional approach, I'd say, to the way in which they're doing some of that engagement. Do you see B2B pressure, influence, or synergies in CSR? Absolutely, and in fact, I think the biggest opportunities were Jeff Hittner, my partner in crime. Why don't you stand up for a second? Because if you can you give him the microphone, please, so he can. I want to ask him a question because he's got a great example of this.
I'm on the spot.
So tell the audience about the Walker's chips.
Okay. An example that we try to use a lot of how just by looking through a different lens on your business, you can really either generate lots of revenue or really reduce costs was Walker's Potato Chips, which is owned by Pepsi. They decided that they wanted to be the first companies to experiment with doing a complete down to the minutia level of a carbon footprint of a bag of their potato chips. So this took over a year, and it was down to the level of what we call activity-based costing, if anyone's familiar with supply chain activities. And they went, the consulting group, which I believe was the Carbon Trust, went all the way to the potato growers, analyzed what was going on with the potatoes being grown, manufactured, sold to Walkers, fried, distributed. Well, what happened was that it turned out that the potato growers, after growing the potatoes, would fill the potatoes with extra water because they would charge per weight the potatoes to Walker's Potato Chips. They would do this in a giant warehouse, which they would humidify, lots of energy costs, and then Walkers would buy the chips and go, what do we do with potatoes? We fry them. We've got to take the humidity out of the chips, so they would put them in a giant warehouse and use all this energy to heat up the potatoes, remove the water, then they would slice them up, fry them, and they'd be on their way. So just by doing this activity-based costing, this carbon diagnostic of their entire supply chain process, they found more than $20 million in savings. So that's an example of how easily, just by changing the lens at which you're viewing your business, you can find cost reduction opportunities and potentially revenue opportunities.
So I think we have to wrap up. Thanks for your time and attention. There's a paper in the bag that you've got that's got some more detail on what we've discussed today, and I'll be around to answer some questions later if needed. Thanks.
George Poley, everyone. Thank you. Wow. I'm delighted that you were able to share your study with us, and also Jeff Hittner. Thank you very much. You can have some pretty interesting reading when you get back to your offices, the report that we have included for you. I also want to take a moment to and thank Reg Foster with IBM, who's on our foundation board, who helped us make the connection with George. So thank you. Now it's time for a break. There's refreshments outside, and when we come back, you will have two very exciting panels which are going to dive deeper into these issues of key responsibilities and trends and transparency. So see you in about 15 minutes.
137.
What did we designate as the proxy? It was Melissa,
Grant.
so she's going to be here to vote them, right?
Sure.
Because that's kind of key then. Okay.
And this is her information.
She did agree. That's interesting. We were trying to remember we were trying to find one who could actually answer. Okay.
And now, Claire Rosenzweig, President and CEO of the Better Business Bureau serving Metropolitan New York.
Welcome back, everyone. That was a welcome little break. And now, as everybody filters back in, we now have two amazing panels back to back. Literally, they're going to dive into a lot of what we heard earlier today to give you some more tangible things that you can literally take home. I mean, the challenge is always listening to what's being said and literally weeding it out and seeing what can I take back to my business, my nonprofit. And so it has relevance for the things that I do and the people that I work with. The next two panels will help you do that even further than we did earlier. It's a pleasure for me right now to introduce someone who's been a good friend to the BBB, an immediate past leader on our BBB Foundation's board of directors, and someone who's often shared his outstanding expertise with us. Tim McClyman, President and CEO of the American Express Foundation and Vice President for Philanthropy of the American Express Company. Tim has, again, an extraordinary bio that you can read in your packets, but again, I'll point out a few highlights. He directs all of the American Express Company's global philanthropy and employee engagement programs. Before he was with American Express, he was executive director of Second Stage Theater, where he led one of the largest nonprofit theaters in New York City. He served as executive director of the AT&T Foundation, where he directed their global philanthropy and corporate citizenship programs. And again, that would be pretty amazing right there. But he's also an attorney. He's also worked at a New York law firm where he specialized in not-for-profit law. He's on several not-for-profit boards. He's chairman of the Corporate Advisory Council of the American Red Cross. And he's also an adjunct professor at NYU, where he teaches 2 graduate-level courses. All I can say is that I am absolutely thrilled that he's found time to be with us here today as the moderator of the first panel called Making the Social Investment Pay Off, Key Issues and Trends. Please join me in welcoming Tim McClyman and his panel. Tim.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm just the moderator, so it's not that big a deal. I just ask the questions. The real stars of this show here are our panelists, and we have a very distinguished a really distinguished panel and a panel that's really ready to get to it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time introducing them, but I do want to make sure that you know who they are. To my far left is David Vidal, who is the director of the Conference Board Center for Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability. To his right is the person that Gordon earlier referred to as the Grand Dame of CSR, Carol Cohn, who's chairman and founder of Cohn, Inc. Welcome, Carol. And to my immediate right is Deborah Holmes, who's the Americas Director for Corporate Social Responsibility at Ernst & Young. So we're going to go through a few questions here and hopefully get some questions from you as well. But the first thing we'd like to do is to ask you some questions so we get a good idea of who's in the audience. So how many here in the audience are representing publicly traded companies? companies? Okay, good. Small businesses. Okay, good. Nonprofit organizations. A lot of nonprofits. Okay, good. Government agencies. Good, a couple. The media, academia. Any academics? One? Good. All right. And the media. All right, a couple of media. All right, terrific. That's very, very helpful. How many of you are CEOs of your business or nonprofit organization? Okay, good, good. How many of you are sole practitioners or freelancers? Okay, a couple, good. And then finally, how many of you consider yourselves informed consumers? All right, a lot of hesitation there with those. Okay, great. That's very, very helpful. Earlier this morning, we heard Gordon say that CSR is not a passing trend. And we heard George say that CSR is not a new topic. But we also have seen in a McKinsey global survey recently that nearly 70% of business executives around the world say that global social, environmental, and business trends are increasingly important to corporate strategy, but very few companies act on the global trends that will affect them the most. So CEOs, business executives say that trends are important, but they do very little to act upon those trends. So we're just going to explore that for a few minutes here. I'm going to ask each of the panelists if they could think of 2 or 3 key global trends or local trends, since we're here in New York City, local trends that are relevant to our discussion of corporate social responsibility. And David, why don't we start with you?
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I would highlight one trend I think all of us will be impacted with in one way or another. And if I had to put it into 2 words, I would say China's awakening. And I don't mean awakening only in the opening of the market to American goods or vice versa, because that's kind of like a given. But I'll give you one example of an awakening that you may not be as aware of as I am, since I do this all day long. A couple of weeks ago, we had a presenter at one of our programs on sustainability and energy who was an expert advisor to the university system in Los Angeles. And he was advising them on issues of energy efficiency, savings, all in the context of reducing the carbon footprint and impact of that system, which has cost implications, but also has public policy and just general community well-being implications. And in the context of his statement, his story, he told of how he had been contracted by the provincial government of Inner Mongolia in China to help them understand how they could leapfrog the latest developments in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the governmental point of view. Now, I don't know, I think the last time I heard of Mongolia was when I read a book about Marco Polo in the 9th grade. But just think about it for a second. Here we are in the middle of Rockefeller Center, New York City, the capital of the world, leading country in the world, richest place ever, maybe in history. And we're trying to catch up to this whole idea of corporate citizenship, sustainability, CSR, green initiatives. And oh, by the way, there is an entity in Inner Mongolia that's trying to get ahead of you. Okay? That's an awakening. And it should be an awakening to you as well to say that while we are moving at our own comfortable pace of rolling these issues through the language of business, which requires a number to be interpreted as valid, somebody out there is thinking, I know what's really happening, and I have to move on this very fast, and that's an issue that will change the context of the marketplace. So I think that the awakening of the issue in places like China that are driving all market economics and drivers for most of us will have a significant driving impact on the whole issue, regardless of whether you're ready for it or not.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Deborah?
Okay. Is this on? Yeah. David, I love that one. I was going to say there are a couple that I think are kind of obvious that I'll say really quickly, and then I want to say what I think is kind of the bigger one. The ones that are kind of obvious are the ones that everybody's already thinking about, like climate change. Obviously an important issue. Companies are having to deal with it. We all know about that. Another one that I would put in the same kind of category is education, the educational crisis, whether you're talking about, the U.S., where for every student who starts high school, the number that go on and get a degree and go to college is below, for every 100, fewer than 40 go on to college. That's in the United States. The statistics are similar in a lot of other Western European countries, not to mention the countries of Africa and South America, where the numbers are even worse. And India and China, which are being talked about, I think one of the previous speakers said, which are being talked about as powerhouses of human resources, right, because there are so many people in those countries. In actual fact, the education systems in those countries, at least now, although, how quickly Inner Mongolia fixes this is probably going to be breathtaking in its speed, but at least now, India and China are not actually turning out large quantities of human resources that global companies can just plug into their operations because the education systems don't allow them to do that. So there are issues like climate change, there are issues like education, but I actually think in terms of a trend, the biggest issue, I think, is the continuing retreat by government from roles that we used to think of as governments, and the increasing expectation of other sectors of society that it's going to be business that's going to plug that gap. So if you think about Hurricane Katrina and, who rushed in to save the people of New Orleans and the Gulf area after Hurricane Katrina, it was Home Depot. It was other companies. We saw the U.S. government sit on its hands. And for a number, that's one example. I could give a whole lot. You're probably thinking of examples. But I think that we've sort of reached a consensus around the role of government in established states being much smaller than it was 50 years ago. And then in emerging states, the government is too weak, or it's failed, or it's hopelessly corrupt. And so business increasingly, I think, is being expected to play and increasingly is playing the role that previously government would have played. And I think that has huge implications that we haven't fully digested yet.
Deborah, do you think that's true here in New York City, too?
Well, I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I've lived in New York all of my life except for the years that I did my education. So you'd think that I would have an answer at my fingertips, but can you tell that I'm stalling? Because I haven't thought about the question. I think that as a New Yorker, as opposed to as a corporate responsibility professional, I think we have an extremely engaged government in the city of New York right now, which is taking a lot of responsibility for a lot of what historically government did take responsibility for. So that said, I also don't oversee Ernst & Young's presence in the city of New York. I have team members who do that, and so there may be ways in which, and I apologize for all of you who are very involved in this and know a lot more about it than I do, I'm sure I know there are companies that are doing a lot in the city of New York, but I think they're doing a lot in partnership with the mayor's office, as opposed to taking over for the mayor's office because the mayor's office isn't doing the mayor's job.
Or in opposition.
Or in opposition, right.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Carol.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the BBB for inviting me to this incredible conference. And just a couple things to just get out there, because I know some of you are thinking, is she or is she not the chief cone head? Thank you. Yes, I am. But I really want to know the answer to the question, Gordon, what is a grand dame? Because, gosh, that seems to make me very old, and I don't want to be old. And then the last thing I'd just like to say before I answer the question seriously, it gives me incredible pride and satisfaction to hear Gordon and to hear George talking in such an eloquent way with a lot of real examples, as well as my colleagues here, that doing good has come of age. And when I started the work in 1982 and founded our company in 1980 and grew up in the late 60s, when you talked about linking a company with a social issue that was strategically done, I was seen as like something just strange, with 3 eyes or a do-gooder or a pat on the head, which is how I went from 6 feet tall to 5 feet tall. But it's incredibly exciting to see that this has become mainstream, that this is a lot of it because of the transparency afforded through the internet and instant communication and globalization. So this is about a have to do, not a nice to do. I believe that all of us here today are saying, what is our role? And how can we do this strategically? How can we not break the bank? How can we get some actually traction in this area? Because this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. With George, I respectfully disagree a little bit. I don't think there'll be a gigantic bubble in this, because I still see organizations a little bit more cautiously going into this, unlike the irrational exuberance of the internet. So I think that is a very good thing. In terms of a trend, one of the trends that I see that is both global and local is this gigantic disparity between the haves and the have-nots. On a global basis, you may have heard of the bottom of the pyramid, which is over 2 billion people who are making less than $2 a day. And those people, unfortunately, the good news is that now being seen as a market for companies who are going to underserved and emerging countries to provide new products and services, whether it's microfinance or it's telecommunications, whether it's SC Johnson, who has gone into villages in Kenya and created tiny little businesses providing sanitation and insect eradication to a person who would then go resell it to others, which helps really for the quality of life. In New York City, and because I know a little bit about United Way I've worked with Gordon when he was the leader at Safe Horizon, there's over 1.5 million people living at or below the poverty level. And there was an amazing number in the United Way annual report recently that talked about there's 700,000 millionaires in this city. Seems like a lot. But there's 700,000 people who are not taking advantage of their food stamps. That's a huge, huge, schism and chasm between the two. What it says for all of you out there as a core issue is that economic opportunity, in terms of giving someone a leg up, especially locally, is what companies need to do to have a more vibrant economy, and what the not-for-profits in this room can provide in terms of services.
Okay, thank you very much. There's been a lot of discussion this morning about stakeholders, particularly George, who focused on that issue a little bit. So we want to shift a little bit to talk about stakeholders. And I'm going to ask, who do you think are the 2 or 3 key stakeholders for corporate responsibility, and how can businesses best learn about the issues that are most important to these stakeholders? Deborah?
I think employees are the number one stakeholder for corporate responsibility. There's just such a wealth of data showing that at every point in the employment relationship, starting with when you're recruiting them, up to when they join you, up to when they work for you, up to when they make a decision about whether to keep working for you, that for the people that you want to attract and retain, to believe that they're working for, number one, that they're working for a place whose values are congruent with their own. Number two, that they have an opportunity through their job to make a difference. There's just, I think the evidence at this point is incontrovertible. There's some debate about whether it's specific to this generation of young people or whether it's something that because it's now okay to talk about, young people are now talking about it. Personally, that's my opinion, is the latter, is that this has always mattered, but young people who are coming into companies didn't feel that it was acceptable for them to talk about this stuff, so they didn't very much, but they were voting with their feet all along. So I would say that employees, and interestingly, if you ask the person on the street, there have been a number of polls done asking just sort of ordinary people, what does corporate responsibility mean? And by far the most common response is treating your employees well. So I think the largest stakeholder for corporate responsibility is employees. That said, I think that there are, and then customers and consumers, obviously, but I also think that there are different stakeholders for different businesses, and who those stakeholders are change over time. So let me just use one example, which is the banking industry. There was now, I think that given what's happened with the subprime credit crisis, subprime mortgage crisis, the stakeholders for corporate responsibility in the banking sector have become all of us, because the fallout is so monumental. There was a time when the stakeholders in that industry would have been people who held mortgages or people who held loans. Who the stakeholders are can change very, very fast, and keeping on top of that is a challenge and is critically important. And how do you do it? You know, I think what George was talking about, which is I sort of think of as radical transparency, that move from containment to transparency, and trying not to see anybody as your enemy in this space, but as people who are also, like you, motivated by a set of values and trying to do the right thing according to those values. And none of us, I hope, are crooks. And so we should all be trying to have a conversation in which we're bringing our perspectives and our self-interest to the table, and are working out a way to move forward that honors all of that. And I think the example of Nike, you know, treating the NGOs as its eyes and ears where it can't have eyes and ears, is a fantastic example. So that's how, you know, to me, that's how you find out about what your stakeholders care about, is you engage with them ongoingly.
Carol, do you agree with that?
I would say employees, yes, and I'd say number one, number two, number three, because organizations are built from the inside out, and that being able to bring your values to work versus park them at the door is, I think, a latent desire of boomers. In terms of millennials, we did a piece of research about 18 months ago. It's on our website if you'd like to get it. It was the first millennial study about millennials and social causes and what they are looking for in employers.
And could you just tell us what millennials are for those people who might not know?
Okay. Millennials were born between 79 and 98. And they are the next generation of young people to be coming into the workplace. We see them as the most pro-social generation since World War II. From our research, 61% were worried about the state of the world and feel personally responsible to make a difference. And this young group of this next generation, you know, they're totally wired. They're seeing things instantly around the world. They also, as part of their school requirements, have to do community service. But they're also generating it on their own. I heard of a 7-year-old who was having a birthday party, and she sent out a little notice with a picture of her dog on the invitation, and she said, "Don't bring me presents, make a donation to the local animal shelter." And that's just happening spontaneously. Just some other numbers. 83% of millennials trust a company more that is socially or environmentally responsible. Almost 90% are likely to switch products and services if they know about a company's good practices. 80% want to work for a company, so that supports, again, the choosing. And it's interesting, I heard from a very senior resource that the second question after what might the position be, salary, responsibility, is what does the company stand for in society? It is very, very true. And then there's another number here that's really, really interesting, especially when we're trying to communicate to a young person about who we are, our products and services. 74% are more likely to pay attention to advertising messages. So think about it as that, because there's, thousands of messages that are pushed at young people today especially, and they just block them out. They just don't hear them. But if they know about a company's, quote, goodness, then their ears, think about really large ears, and the messages begin, the multiple millions and millions and millions of dollars that's spent in advertising begins to penetrate because the individual is more receptive. So, employees.
That's interesting. Okay. Employees, millennials in particular. Okay, David, do you agree with both of these?
I do agree, but I think it's a very easy thing to agree to. It's something of a no-brainer, so I would make the question something else and say, what is the significance of having some awareness of what your stakeholder universe is. And the true significance is, what are you using that knowledge to change the way you make decisions?
That was going to be my next question.
It kind of flows naturally, because in point of fact, what this whole, let's call it movement, phenomenon, development, whether CSR, whether green, whether sustainability, all names are valid. What it really means is that it's challenging the basic decision-making inputs that have been conventionally used by business people for the past 200 years, if not 500 years. I would say 500 years from the point of view of accounting, because that's how all accounting is. It was invented in Italy. You know, when they say bankrupt, they actually broke a bench when the ships came in from their trade routes and so on. But that accounting has not caught up to the knowledge era. We still talk in terms of intangibles, as if the world was defined by tangibles, and we know that that's not true, because we all breathe, and we have a tangible body. We have no idea where the breath comes from. We have no idea where the connection is, and then we're talking about tangibles versus intangibles. And so businesses don't really make decisions on the old hardwire way. There's a new software. The way I like to describe it is that we have had a tradition of hardware, that excludes the software era. Stakeholders are part of the software era. Networks, software era. Sustainability, software era. All the stuff that kind of becomes the instructions for how the hardware moves, all that's what we're talking about. Now, if you're going to tell me that we are only in a hardware era and software doesn't count, you're welcome to believe that. But I'm going to tell you that if you miss the software, you're missing the whole point. And that most of the stuff that's now considered intangible is the source of value. And most of that depends on a network of knowledge that is more stakeholder than shareholder. Because shareholders have only one measure, which is the financial return. And financial return is a very good measure of financial return, but not much else.
So how do you get at those stakeholders, David?
You talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you talk to the people who give you money to start your businesses, and you talk to investment bankers, they give you a read on the possibilities of your capital investment, giving them more capital so they can get more money and give it to somebody else who wants more money, which is a legitimate thing, by the way. I'm not a communist. But I'm suggesting to you that while that's good, it isn't good enough for these other purposes, because the world is saying that business has this great prominence all over the world, China, India, Russia, hurrah, capitalism won, hurrah. But what are you doing for me lately in terms of these thousands of people who are dying of hunger? So how good are you, capitalism? I'm hungry. Can you solve that? Well, what's the answer? No. We can't say you don't have enough money, therefore you can't buy our stuff. And oh, by the way, if you read Capitalism and Freedom, Milton Friedman's opus, which is often cited as the source of, the responsibility of business, basically theoretically, a lot of people forget that Milton Friedman says in that little book, I read it in business school, there are 3 conditions for the whole system to work, and one of them is that people have to have money to play. So if you don't have money to play, you're excluded from that system, says Milton Friedman, not me.
So just going back to employees, Deborah, how do you talk to employees?
Oh, God. How do you talk to employees? I'm sorry, this is a hard question for me to answer, because Ernst & Young, I think, is unusual in the degree of our commitment to employees, our talking to employees. We're the only company to have been on the Fortune 100 Best list now for 10 years in a row. Our chairman gets up in front of business conferences and says that at Ernst & Young, we put our people first. So I'm sorry, this is what he says to our clients and our prospective clients. You probably think that we put you first, but in actual fact, we put our people first, because we understand that it's from our people that our ability to serve you grows. So when you ask me a question like how do we talk to employees, it is so at the core of everything that we do that the list would go on for years. I'll give you a couple of examples. Obviously, we do employee surveys. We do all those best practice kind of things, right? Employee surveys and focus groups and all the rest of it. And we have ethics hotlines and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I'm particularly proud of, in part because I led the development of it 10 years ago at Ernst & Young, is that we have an unusually open culture in terms of diversity issues and identity issues. So we not only have affinity groups for women, for African Americans, for gay and lesbian employees, all of the sort of usual affinity groups, but we're the kind of place where when an employee has a personal tragedy, has a baby born, let's say, who isn't okay, that employee not only knows that it's okay, but feels completely supported in reaching out through all of the various electronic means at his or her disposal to create an immediate affinity group around parents who have had children who suffer from life-threatening illnesses. And there's no question that all these people will have time off and that to meet and that they'll have company resources to do it. I mean, we just really, really believe that if you can't – our chairman talks about this too. He talks about the fact that basically with the job market the way it is and with employees as well-trained as we have, every single one of them is a volunteer. They show up at work every day because they want to, and they could go somewhere else in a heartbeat, and that's how we treat them, like volunteers. How do you talk to them? You create a safe space for them to talk to you, I guess, is what I would say. And you don't do that only through the periodic, annual opinion survey or even quarterly opinion survey, but you create a space in which they know that there are not just their official counselors or supervisors, but it's my job as a partner at Ernst & Young to mentor anybody who shows up at my door and asks for mentoring. That's part of what I'm expected to do, and it's part of what I'm measured on. I'll tell you one other thing is that at Ernst & Young we have, like many companies, a 5-point rating scale for people. And it starts when you join the company, and no matter how many years you're there, you're still being rated on that 5-point rating scale. It is impossible to, and there are 3 dimensions to the rating scale because we have a balanced scorecard, and one of the dimensions is people, how you treat people. And that's measured, right, in upward feedback every year. And it is impossible at Ernst & Young to get the highest performance rating, no matter what your level, no matter how much money you're generating for the company, if you don't get the highest rating on the people dimension. That's the environment that we're living in, and I think our people feel that, and so they know that there are a lot of people that they can talk to, and we have we believe that we have our finger on the pulse of what matters to our people.
So, Deborah, just because you've brought up the issue of measurement, there's been a lot of discussion about measuring corporate social responsibility, return on investment in corporate social responsibility. How should a business assess the impact of its corporate social responsibility activities on its business? Carol?
Well, first, to assess it, you need to upfront decide what you want to measure. And very often, and that can be qualitative and quantitative. It doesn't just have to be quantitative. So any road will take you there if you don't know where you're going. So it's first saying, what are we going to measure? And if it's in the employee realm, you want to have a benchmark in terms of where you are at. So satisfaction, retention, engagement, referenceability to others to bring them in, whatever. And then each year you can, or as many times. I love the fact that Deborah says, by the way, that we create a safe space for them to talk with you, which is fabulous, because I think just having one measurement time is not enough. So I think with employees, you can get feedback. A lot of that's qualitative. I think certainly measurement with the environment can be much more quantitative if you are saving dollars in terms of electricity costs or carbon emissions or such. And then on the social side, it's a lot harder because sometimes there's inputs, outputs, outcomes, and it's very expensive to truly see, especially in education, for example. Over the long time, you need to do longitudinal studies, which are very costly. So you need to weigh in terms of measurement the cost versus what you're going to get from measurement. There's an interesting thing. Measurement's critical because, again, as the field is becoming more and more greater investments, I'm hearing about programs that have $100 million investments. You're seeing GE that's putting $1.5 billion into Eco-Imagination R&D. And GE, by the way, if they create new products, if you have products and new services that are coming out, you know if you sold more. But I've also talked to CEOs who have said, and this is surprising, so I still think that CSR is still early stage, except for really leadership companies. And I'll say, well, we really want to measurement. measure this, and how are we going to do it? And they say, I know it's working because I feel it in my gut, which I'm sure you've all heard that. So I think that we're in the early stages of some of the measurement.
And David, you do this for a living, research and measurement. How do you feel a company should be measuring the impact on its business?
I think the biggest challenges that companies face, and one of the challenges that we see on a recurring basis, is how to understand the reality of things that are not attached to a specific number. Because the convention of business thinking, and certainly of scientific management, which is based on predictability, certainty, risk formulas, outcomes that are determined years in advance and approved by a 30-year-old analyst at Goldman, right, on a quarterly basis. And that becomes the running orders for all of society. Fundamentally, just think about that. That's what happens. So I think the biggest challenge is to first agree, as Carol noted, that all reality cannot be translated into a number at the beginning. So if you're starting something and you are insisting that you know what the outcome is before you start, you want to know what the return is on that investment before you make that investment, which can be done with a bunch of dollars or euros or yen. Because the system for that has been in place for a good 500 years. There's a whole capital market. There are millionaires downtown. Some of those are right in your neighborhood, right? Who do nothing all day but to measure that and say, I'm going to tell you exactly what percentage of return you're going to get on this, and that's that beta, and I can prove it to you. Not only that, but I can prove it to you over a period of like 10, 15 years past, so going forward, it's be about the same, okay? So the dependence on that reliability, on that certainty, works against making judgments that are the source of all innovation and are really the source of all creativity. If Steve Jobs had insisted on having an ROI for his Mac, he never would have done it. If Bill Gates had insisted on having an ROI for his program, he never would have done it. If Henry Ford had followed the advice of his customers and his people, he would have produced a whole lot of horse-drawn carriages, because that's what the customers wanted. Okay? So I think that the main thing is a mindset change. Before you get to ROI, you have to decide, is the ROI mindset the appropriate one for what you're trying to do? And I fear that what business people are often falling into is that trap. That since we come from a financial capital preservation and growth mentality, that's the only measure. And you end up measuring things that don't really matter. So as opposed to the motivation of your employees, as opposed to why people want to work with you, as opposed to your reputation, all of which you can't quantify, as opposed to why anybody here, when you go home, people want to welcome you. What's the ROI of that? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Great. Good. Deborah, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I'm from an accounting firm, so the idea that you can't measure everything is, fundamentally very uncomfortable for us. That said, I'm a lawyer. I'm not an accountant, so it doesn't hurt me personally. I'm of two minds on this subject. On the one hand, of course, I agree with everything that you just said, David. How could one not? It's so true. And yet, at the same time, as somebody who works within business, I'm uncomfortable about the idea that my programs are going to have to be funded, and the decisions about funding those programs are going to be made by people who are making decisions about funding other aspects of our business, aspects where return on investment is quantifiable. And I get nervous about leading a function that exists for as long as somebody has some vague idea that it makes somebody feel good about something in some unquantifiable way. Because when the going gets tough, those are the programs, those are the approaches that don't make it because they're competing against the programs and approaches that are able to produce the numbers. So I think that it behooves us to do the very best job we can to measure. That said, Carol, you're also absolutely right that measuring social impact is impossible. I mean, how can I, one of the programs that I developed that I really love is the Corporate Responsibility Fellows program, where we send Ernst & Young people on a fully paid basis for 3 months to countries in South America where they bring their Ernst & Young skills to help very small entrepreneurs who are poised to become much larger and more successful, thereby employing more people and making more of an economic difference. That's a really great program. I believe it's a really great program. Right now, the only ways that we can quantify it have to do with the impact on the fellows themselves, the Ernst & Young employees who have this experience and come back better in a whole host of ways. I would love to be able to quantify the impact on the entrepreneurs that they serve. I haven't figured out a way to do that yet. Impact measurement is really, really, really hard to do. I feel better about saying that because I recently was at a conference with the woman Faye Tversky, who leads measurement and evaluation for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I thought, and she said, it's really, really difficult. And I thought, if Faye Tversky can't do it, it's okay that I can't do it too. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
So, Carol, you're going to agree? You look poised to agree there.
Oh, no, I do agree. I think that David's comment about creativity is really, really important. I think that this whole field, two things that happen that are hard to measure, but they're critically important, is the creativity that is unleashed, especially in the employee population, is extraordinary. It's positive. It's about innovation. It's about collaboration. It's about learning. So I think you can do pre and post measurement and attitudinal, which is helpful, which is really helpful. I think the second thing that we really should all understand about this whole field is that we're generating authentic content. We're creating stories. We're gaining mini successes. We're making people connect with people. And I have to ask a question because I'm owned by Omnicom. Any ad people in here? Couple. Okay. Don't get me wrong, but I believe that there's a seismic shift going on in terms of advertising is about telling stories and about adding emotion to brands and services and such. And I believe that the content that we're doing and creating is so rich and valuable, easy to distribute via online mediums or word of mouth. This is not your measurement answer, sorry, but I just wanted to make again the point that any of the work that any of you are doing, you're creating content and storytelling, and that is hugely valuable to every organization that you are in. Because authenticity today, to build trusted relationships, authenticity is capital. And so I want everyone in the room, no matter where you sit, to understand that you're creating incredible capital that can't be easily replicated. And that is hugely valuable, especially in word-to-word marketing and communications.
Can I just interject something on that? Because I think Carl has made a very foundational point that I wish everyone takes away. At heart, we are all engaged in a debate about what capital is worthy of our attention. Okay? And we start with the geometric axiom, that all capital is financial. That's the starting point. Yeah. That's where the ROI measures come from. That's where that leverage comes from. All the measures that we're looking for are based on the idea that all capital is financial. Carol has just told us that authenticity is capital. Okay? Tim has asked us about stakeholder capital in a certain way. I have talked to you about, I guess, mindset capital. Okay? And we speak in terms of human beings as resources because they're all put into this context of capital. They're not people, they're resources because everything has a capital base. So if you move just 1 degree off the capital as finance base, and you consider that the neighborhood is becoming more crowded, the neighborhood is changing, and you have a new neighbor that says, I am stakeholder capital, I am reputation capital, I am common sense capital, I'm trust capital, I'm authenticity capital. What are you going to say? You're either going to move out of the neighborhood or you're going to adjust. We're suggesting to you that the wiser thing, rather than lose all the money put into that house, changing the roof, improving the windows, now, don't move. Adjust to the neighborhood. And you'll be far better off, and you'll be richer by having a notion that the very idea of capital has been dramatically broadened. and therefore the skills to manage, direct, and lead that new diversity, that new portfolio, are different. That's the basic point. All the other stuff is fluff.
Thank you, David. Since, Carol, you mentioned ad people, I just wanted to pose one last question before we get on to questions from the audience. And that's a question of whether businesses should be engaged in promoting their corporate social responsibility to their stakeholders or to the public. And if so, how do you do that without appearing too self-serving? Or if you don't do it, how do people find out that you're a good corporate citizen? Carol.
Okay. Well, since we are also a communications business at our heart, and our research that we've been doing for over 10 years says that employees and consumers want to know what a company is doing. So you have the license to communicate. The challenge, again, goes back to authenticity and who is telling what about whom. Obviously, I'll give you an example today. Gordon gave me that very nice accolade, I'm a grand dame. Much more effective than me telling you I'm a grand dame. So third-party endorsement is very, very important. Finding the human stories, which are rich and in-depth and heartfelt, very important. That's a way to gain great exposure. And the more creativity, then there's word of mouth, and especially through the internet or social networks. So that's how messages are shared. Now, I have to tell you the downside, because there's a really interesting thing going online that I heard about yesterday. And this has to do is that you really need, we say something at Cone called earn the accolades, meaning get some results about what you're doing before you try and pat yourself on the back. Everybody here knows about the Dove campaign, show of hands. Dove Evolution, Real Beauty, fabulous, great program created from a very courageous brand manager who sold it up in the organization. They've had huge results, huge results. But here's what happened. Unilever is the parent of Dove. Unilever, this is how the left side of the house needs the right side of the house to be. When you really put yourself out there, first of all, lesson number one, you need a thick skin, because there's always someone who's going to beat you up. And how Unilever is getting beaten up right now is that they decided to switch to palm oil because palm oil is better in certain ingredients than trans fats and things like that. Sounds good. So they then went to Indonesia, unfortunately, to source the palm oil, and they're cutting down trees. Has anybody heard this story? Okay. This is outrageous. So what's happening is that these forests are the homes for orangutans, and the orangutans are being decimated. So, let's see, Greenpeace went after Unilever tooth and nail. And what did they do? They went and did a movie for online. It's on YouTube. I think it may be called Onslaught. And it's an Indonesian girl, and behind it then they do the fast cuts, and they show how the rainforests are being decimated and that the orangutans are dying. Well, you might go, oh my God, it's got to be fringe, Carol, it's not important. 300,000 views on YouTube alone, I think, in the last week. Now, here's what happened. It actually, then they also had people dressed as orangutans climbing the Unilever corporate offices, and they sent that one out, but that only got 1,500 views. But here's what happened. The power of new media, and it spread around the world really fast, has caused the CEO of Unilever to decide that they will source their palm oil in other places. So Greenpeace got their result. So, again, thick skin, but keep doing incredible communications.
Good. Thank you. A couple of questions from the audience. First one is on advocacy. We've determined that CSR is attractive to companies, employees, etc., but it's my sense that the term advocacy still makes the corporation hesitant, nervous, whether it's supporting an NPO that advocates or a company that actually gets behind a certain piece of legislation that impacts supply chain economics, etc. Do you see companies incorporating advocacy more as a CSR platform? Is supporting organizations that advocate a CSR trend? Who would like to tackle that? David?
The United States Climate Action Partnership, for one, which has a bunch of really big companies advocating that the United States as a government, federal government, has to awaken to a different world reality and do something about pricing carbon. That's clearly one. I think it speaks to one of the trends that we did not address specifically, and that is that there are increasing limits on what individual companies can do on some of these very big issues. You can have the best mind, the best employees, the best business plan, 20 years of good returns, but you, company-wide, you can't solve global warming by yourself. You can't solve the bottom of the pyramid by yourself. So one of the pressures for companies will be, how do we get together around some common things for the commons that go beyond our authority to act in our self-interest, which is authorized and legal, but is not fully human. Because I can succeed on my own and fail in the community, and so what good is that individual success? And I think that's going to be one of the biggest issues, is now and will be continue to be, how do you adequately engage with other companies to work on issues of common concern for the health of the whole system, not just the business system, the global health system of the planet, and the health of the human community. That's not on our plate, people. That's not what has been the case before. That's what's scary. That we are all being asked as individuals to correspond in answer to really huge things that no one individual or business entity can handle on that unit basis, which has been the measure of our success. And if we continue to do that, will also be the measure of our failure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Another question, how do you balance what your employees care about supporting with those program areas versus aligning giving to your company's business interests?
Can I take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What a smart question. I really love this question. Thank you to whomever asked it. That's a really, really tough one. You know, I think all of us in the corporate responsibility or philanthropy or foundation space read the Porter Kramer article in Harvard Business Review whenever it came out that said, you know, align your company's involvement with stuff where your company and your people can actually make a difference. But at the same time, in this era of employee empowerment that we're all in, how can you tell your employees that the cause that they care about passionately isn't one that your company supports? And that is one that you will see different companies thread that tension is one that you will see different companies thread the needle on in very, very different ways. I'll share with you how Ernst & Young does it, not because it's the best model, but because it's the strategic decision that we made, and I think you may find it interesting. You will find other companies represented in this room that have taken a very different approach. So what we did at Ernst & Young was that we said, first of all, we really believe in this Porter Kramer idea, that given that we have 30,000 highly trained, skilled employees in over 100 locations in the U.S. and Canada alone, these people can make a difference in their communities in ways that go beyond painting a school, let's say, because that seems to be the example du jour. And what are the particular areas where we can make a difference? Well, through a very laborious, exhaustive, time-consuming process, we decided to focus on two areas. One is improving access to higher education, in particular for disadvantaged and minority students, by helping to demystify the process of applying to and affording college. And that made sense for us because basically with all of these highly trained, all of our people have gone to college, like give or take 20 people, right, out of the 30,000. They all have college degrees. And so they've all been through this process of applying to and affording college. And interestingly, the accounting profession turns out to be a gateway profession. For many, many families, it's a child who becomes an accountant, ultimately, who is the first member of the family to go to college. And so this issue of going to college has enormous emotional resonance for people in the accounting profession. Who knew? So that's one area that we've decided to focus, and the other area where we've decided to focus is in the area of entrepreneurship. And that's because, again, it grows out of our roots as a company. Originally, we served mostly small and medium-sized companies. We still have the dominant share in that space. We run the Entrepreneur of the Year Award every year in the U.S. for more than 20 years. Now it's in more than 50 countries worldwide. So entrepreneurship is something that we feel we really know about, makes sense for us to focus on that. Plus, entrepreneurship has tremendous potential to lift individuals and communities out of poverty. So that's where we wanted to focus. But now you're somebody who cares about breast cancer. You're an employee of ours who cares terribly about the Humane Society or anyone, juvenile diabetes, any one of a host of other really, really worthy issues. What do we do about that? So here's what we've decided to do.
Do it in 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Okay.
Education and entrepreneurship are where the company is going to focus its big efforts. Other stuff is still going to be supported, but at a lesser level. So the metaphor that I use is, think of this whole idea of a community engagement as a big tent. Everybody's welcome inside the tent, but the band is going to be cooler, the food is going to be better, the light show is going to be more exciting in the part of the tent that's focused on education and entrepreneurship.
Okay,
That's
good.
one compromise.
Yeah, good way of looking at it. We've been given the hook here, but I just want to give everybody an opportunity to make one final statement, and we'll start with David. Final parting words?
What do you want to be remembered for? And what is the ROI on that?
Okay. Anybody want to answer that question? No. Deborah.
I cede the floor.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Carol, you have the last word.
Well, I'll just steal from Nike, which is just do it. And I think this has been a great conversation. Don't be scared. Be courageous. You don't have to have something as huge as what IBM is doing. And you can start at any point. I believe we're still early stage in truly, truly impactful, strategic, aligned CSR. If you're just doing, and just doing is okay, great strategic philanthropy, that's okay. If you're just doing fabulous community relations, that's okay. If you're doing, it's got to be right for the organization and the temperature of the employees and the institutional will. So just do it.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, each of you. That was terrific. And again, we can all see how this discussion grew out of this morning. And now our next panel, I'm going to invite up. We touched on it in this panel, all about transparency. You have to walk the talk. Basically, the next panel is going to be led by someone I'm pleased to introduce, Lee Peeler, who, again, I'm glad to say I've known for many years in my business life. Lee is president and CEO of the Better Business Bureau's very own National Advertising Review Council, and he's executive vice president of National Advertising Self-Regulation for our national organization, the Council of Better Business Bureaus. As NARC, as we'll call it for short, as NARC president, Mr. Peeler is responsible for leading the advertising industry's national system of self-regulation, which is a system dedicated to fostering truth and accuracy in advertising. Lee joined the NARC in 2006 following a 33-year career at the Federal Trade Commission. I'm honored to have you with us today, Lee. Thank you. And he will introduce his panel. Thank you, Lee.
Okay. Can I have the panelists come up? And Claire, thanks for the very kind introduction. This has been a great morning. It's all about building trust, and that's what the BBB is about, all about building trust. We've heard this morning how corporate responsibility has moved beyond philanthropy into a corporate imperative, that there are two forces moving this. One's consumer empowerment and information, and the other is the fact that it's not just good business, but it's good for business. A big piece of that is how you communicate. We have a great panel here to talk to you about how you can communicate this information to consumers. First, Rhonda McClain will give us her perspective on dealing with transparency issues from inside the corporation. Rhonda is the Associate General Counsel of Time, Inc. She conducts legal reviews and is responsible for regulatory compliance for all of Time, Inc.'s 40 magazines that it publishes in the United States and Canada. She provides advising counsel to 300 clients, like 3 times the size of the room. Talk about busy. I had the good fortune to work with Rhonda when she was the Assistant Regional Director at the FTC's Northeast Regional Office, and if anybody can keep 300 clients in line, it's Rhonda. Next, we'll hear from Susan Pufflia. Susan is the Executive Vice President of the public relations firm Golan Harris and a practice leader of a unit called Change. What a great name for a unit. Change. Change's specialty Her specialty practice is in corporate citizenship and social responsibility. Her expertise spans a broad portfolio, including consumer marketing and brand positioning, but also crisis communications, which is really the flip side of a lack of social responsibility. And finally, we're privileged to have Ed Chansky, a principal in the law firm of Levitt Rockwood. Ed also brings a wealth of experience to today's discussions. His practice includes advising many Fortune 500 companies on various aspects of cause marketing and charitable giving, as well as working with marketers and agencies in the area of sales promotion, trade regulation, and sweepstakes law. And Ed's prepared to give us all a final exam at the end of the panel, so don't leave before you get your grade. With that, I'll turn it over to Rhonda.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to see you again. So a little background on where we are now and where we come from. Time Inc. is one of the largest content companies in the world today. We have over 120 magazines, including some of the world's most popular and trusted brands, like Time, Fortune, People, Sports Illustrated, and we've got some newbies which you may not recognize as Time Inc., which is Real Simple, which is one of my favorites. And a lot of my girlfriends say, that's a Time Inc. magazine? Yeah, baby, it is. Essence is also a very important part of our portfolio. Each month, 1 out of every 2 Americans reads one of our magazines, and 1 out of every 7 who are online visits one of our 92 websites. Part of my compliance responsibility is over the websites and any electronic marketing there. So yes, I am a busy bee. As a company with global reach and influence, we have always felt an obligation to promote social responsibility, whether it be by educating our readers or on climate change or engaging thousands of Time Inc. employees in community service programs. As we look at the first slide, you can get an idea of all of the different kinds of things we've tried to educate ourselves as a business, our employees, and our public about as a part of our commitment to service in the community. As you heard earlier this morning from my boss, our General Counsel, Marie Settleson, Time Inc. has this long-standing history, over 80 years old, of dedication to corporate social responsibility and transparency. Although I'm here to tell you, we didn't know any of those phrases 80 years ago. Nobody knew what they were. It was just considered, I believe, the right thing to do. In October 1965, Time magazine ran a cover story on the worldwide use and misuse of water. In January 1967, we devoted an entire issue to air pollution. In December 1973, we ran a cover story on the energy crisis. And in October 1987, we uncovered and sort of demystified the greenhouse effect for millions of Americans with a story called The Heat is On. As we move to our next slide, it's so nice to have these AV warriors. I love it. Here are more recent covers from Time, Sports Illustrated, and Entertainment Weekly that illustrate our ongoing commitment to doing well while doing good. I should talk a little bit now about the fact that we are a multimedia company. There is always a real challenge to maintain the delicate balance between covering the story and becoming the story, as we just heard about Unilever and the Dove example. In Time Inc., and also I think in any multimedia company, there has to be a long-standing, and in our company, cherished church and state relationship between the editorial and publishing divisions of the company. In effect, we're like 2 companies in one, in that and more. My CEO runs the business side of the company, and John Huey, our ultimate editor-in-chief of all of the magazines, runs the editorial side. We each cannot and must not restrict the activities of the other, so that it's not at all unusual for our magazines to criticize and comment strongly on our business practices, including anything we're going to talk about today. So you'll hear more from my fellow panelists about how to establish and maintain this delicate balance between sort of talking about the story, identifying the issues, and then hopefully not becoming one of them. As we move on, in slide 3, as a compliance officer and an attorney, I was a federal prosecutor for 11 years. I think that's how I got hired here. They didn't want to get in trouble, and they had seen me on the other side of the table. They thought, maybe we should talk to her. So it's been nice to be here for 8.5 years, and it's lovely to be, I'm kind of the person whose job it is to try to think about what is a consumer thinking when they look at anything we put out into the marketplace. Does it make sense? Is it clear? Is it true? And what I can say to my clients is, if it's not, don't darken my door until you get it straight. It's nice to have that job, don't you think? That's my job. That's what I do every day. So in slide 3, we've covered the environment in particular with a certain level of transparency. Obviously, being a media company, I'm going to give you some details. This is a huge challenge and an ongoing challenge for us. We are becoming increasingly transparent about our own effects as a publishing company on the environment. We purchase approximately 500 tons of paper. I'll say that again. 500,000 tons of paper each year. While we began our sustainability efforts long before sustainability became a household word, increasingly our readers, advertisers, and our own employees want to know what we have done and what we are currently doing to reduce the effect our business practices are having on our environment. In 2006, we measured the carbon footprint of 2 magazines, Time and InStyle. We looked at the quantity of greenhouse gases released at every stage of the magazine making process, from the paper mill emissions to transporting the paper. With the results in hand, we became the first publisher to challenge the paper companies, including those from whom we buy our supplies, with reducing these gases by 20% by the year 2012. The suppliers we work with are well on their way to meeting this goal. Recently, we launched Remix, a campaign to promote magazine and catalog recycling. The campaign took off in Boston, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., and Portland, resulting in double-digit % improvement, note the quantification, in the recovering and recycling of magazine products. Instead of starting with the largest cities with the biggest media markets, we decided to launch Remix in cities where we thought we could accomplish a lot and move the needle a bit more noticeably in terms of recycling. Obviously, we have a long way to go on this issue, and we're just starting. In January of this year, Mayor Bloomberg helped us to launch Remix here in New York City. You may have seen our public service announcements and advertisements on subways, bus shelters, in taxis or on the tops of taxis, and of course in our own magazines. Let's move to slide 4. Corporate social responsibility and transparency are not only about being green, although we've talked a lot about that, and it's certainly hot and sexy. Time Inc. values its long-standing role in the community, and we've created many programs to actively engage our 10,000 employees, promoting corporate citizenship, good corporate citizenship, within and outside our company. Promoting community service, as Maurice noted in his welcome remarks this morning, is great, but it really helps when this community service can actually be tracked back to the company. Our Time to Read program, as he mentioned, has hundreds of our employees meeting on a weekly basis with elementary and middle school students and uses our magazine titles, including Time for Kids and Sports Illustrated for Kids, as tools to improve children's reading levels, another quantifying thing, and develop enthusiasm for reading, less quantifiable but certainly important. I should just mention now that in your gift bags is our most recent sustainability report, which goes into a lot more detail than I'll be able to today. Since 2002, we have donated nearly $5 million to various charitable organizations through an annual campaign called Time to Give Back. Our employees have the opportunity to contribute to one of 5 featured programs or to the charity or school of their choice. These contributions are then matched 2-to-1 by Time Inc. We devoted an issue of Time magazine, which is the cover you're looking at now, in 2007, to volunteerism, and it was very inspiring. Indeed, I hope she's here, in this very room is the Time Inc. employee, my colleague in the law department, Carmen Barnes, who's heading up our company-wide effort in support of the National AIDS Walk, scheduled for Sunday, May 18th. Carmen, are you here? Can you wave? There she is. You want to walk? See her. Still, we work hard as a company to find new ways to do well and do good, hand in hand with our employees and the communities. And I need to thank Deborah Holmes from Ernst & Young. 20 women across all of the Time Warner divisions launched the Time Warner Women's Network 4 years ago, and we based our model on the Ernst & Young Women's Network. So there can be peer-to-peer sustainability and corporate social responsibility contributions. Thank you.
So our next speaker, we have a panel today of 3 lawyers, which is
a little
interesting.
scary.
But our next speaker is the exception to that rule. And as I said, Susan's a creative and a marketer, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about the role of transparency in her counseling of clients.
Thank you. And for any of you who know, communications people were control freaks, so I'm going to advance my own slides. And I have to say it was a little intimidating to think of joining a panel filled with attorneys, since sometimes I sit across the table from attorneys arguing with them about what companies should and should not say, because the work that I do, while we focus on corporate responsibility, a big piece of it is around the communications of the initiatives that an organization has. And I thought it might be beneficial for us to lay the groundwork by first talking about what exactly is transparency. And regardless of what definition you choose, once you take out all of the obvious photographic references, you come up with these 3 points. And it's all about being open, frank, honest, free from guile or deceit. These are the very common themes that we see. And even though the title of this session is Transparency as the Holy Grail, what I would propose is that transparency is not the holy grail, it's vital. If you are communicating, if you are operating your business as a socially responsible, environmentally and economically responsible organization, which you should be doing, by the way. If you haven't gotten that point yet, we probably need to have a session number 2. But the point is that if you're not doing these things, and if you aren't transparent about the initiatives that you have in your organization, the ones that are good, the ones that are challenges, the ones that you're working on, that's where you're going to run into communications issues. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So using this as our foundation, there are really 4 cornerstones that we'd identify as part of business strategy and communication strategy as it pertains to corporate responsibility. First and foremost, of course, is transparency. And part of that, we've talked a lot about talking with various stakeholders, but it's also important to sit back and listen. And it's being open about the programs and the policies that you have and listening to feedback from your key stakeholders, whether they reside inside your organization or outside your organization. That's one of the ways, harkening back to the previous panel, you're going to know what kinds of things you should be focusing on, both in terms of your business, but also in terms of your communications. Carol Cohn mentioned authenticity. I would agree wholeheartedly that this is really at the center of everything that we're talking about. If you are not real and genuine and true to the character and the values of your brand and your organization, anything you do, no matter how good it is going to fall flat. And we can talk about many, many different examples that support this. And part of it is, again, talking not only about your successes, but about your shortcomings. There isn't a perfect organization in the world. We know that. But the challenge that we face is addressing those business challenges and demonstrating that while organizations are both aware of them, they're also attempting to make progress against them. Relevancy is the 3rd pillar in this area. And that's really reaching out in a way that demonstrates you are trying to improve. You're not just stagnant where you are today. And frankly, in corporate responsibility, as we all know, the bar is constantly rising. And the competition is not your typical industry competition. The competition is every organization that's out there, large or small. There are companies that are advancing and are being very progressive and innovative in their corporate responsibility practices, and you need to be keeping in mind what all of those organizations are doing and making sure you're doing the right things for your organization, but you're not falling behind the standards that are being set by corporate peers around the world. And finally is consistency, and we talked about walking the talk and talking the walk as well is important. You've got to think about your entire organization. I think Walmart is a great example of a company that is making some phenomenal strides in the environmental area. For those of you that are suppliers or sell products through Walmart, you know what I'm talking about. In addition, everything they're doing, from reducing the carbon output of the organization, from the lights in their stores to their fleet, on and on, they're very, very progressive. However, what do we know about Walmart? They have community issues. They have employee issues. There are questions about the values of the organization. Walmart will never be seen as a responsible corporate citizen until Walmart addresses all of these other areas, and I'll get to that in just a second. So the key thing is to think holistically. And we use the phrases corporate citizenship and corporate responsibility a little bit interchangeably. But again, it's not just what you're doing with regard to the environment. It's what you're doing as it pertains to the values of the organization, how you treat your employees, how you operate in terms of governance, risk management, and so forth. So using this as a level playing field, let me also propose a little different look at how strategically you can look at corporate responsibility. We heard from George Pooley earlier the IBM approach. We call this our 4 buts. And it really comes down to 4 simple premises that relate to different strategies. At the lowest end is the very defensive strategy, cover your butt. Either this is the issues response. This is the crisis scenario. This is the risk mitigation. An organization has come after you, and you have to respond in some way. And some of that might be literally being forced to make changes in your business, or to issue corporate responsibility reports, so on and so forth. The other end of the spectrum is what many organizations have been practicing for many years. We just heard from Rhonda that Time has been running their business in the right way for 80 years. There are many, many examples of it. It's the no ifs, ands, or buts approach, which is truly the business strategy. This is a way of doing business because it's the right thing to do. That's really what we need for organizations to be striving for. And if you are, and if you're using that as your measure, then you'll find that all of these other challenges that you face, they're still going to be there. You're still going to get attacked by by adversaries, but the reality is you'll be better able to withstand those. Holistic approach. It's what you do. It's who you are, how you work, what you do, and what you say. And I think I've covered this. So let me just jump ahead to a couple of last quick things. Through our research, we've identified 12 different drivers of corporate responsibility. These are them here. And again, they fall into these different categories, but it's not just about the environment. In some ways, you could say that green is the new black. If you aren't addressing climate change in your business, you're missing an important value that's incredibly essential to business today. But like the Walmart example I cited, if you aren't also treating your employees well and fairly, and there isn't a perception that you have good business practices, you're going to run into issues there as well. So let's take a quick look at a case. McDonald's is our longest client. We've been working with McDonald's literally for more than 50 years. There's a wonderful story in the public relations business about the founder of Golan Harris, Al Golan, making a cold call to Ray Kroc, who had a couple of hamburger stands at the time. He had some ideas. Ray said, come on over, pitch them to me, and half an hour later, Al walked out with a $250 retainer to work with McDonald's, and our relationship was born. Like many organizations, though, McDonald's has been engaged in corporate responsibility throughout its history. And work that Al did, he's the snappy-looking guy on the left in the photo with the sunglasses, pictured here with Jerry Lewis and with Ray Kroc. What Al coined with Ray was this idea of a trust bank. And it was very much community-based and philanthropy-focused, and it's evolved since then. But in general, the idea is you make deposits of goodwill in a trust bank that you can draw upon in times of needs without damaging the equity in the brand, without losing loyalty of your key stakeholders. And the interesting thing about McDonald's is, for whatever you think you may or may not know about McDonald's, there's certainly in the center, in the hot seat on the obesity crisis and issue. They're the poster child for creating literally obesity in China, if you will. Restaurants went into Shanghai, and all of a sudden there's greater obesity in China. Guess who's at fault? McDonald's. The reality, though, is, or they're claimed to be at fault. The reality, though, is that McDonald's is doing many, many very progressive things across its business, both in terms of active, balanced lifestyles, in terms of how it treats its people, the employee opportunities, which are all about training, education, and advancement, giving back to the communities, looking at their business practices from an environmental standpoint, changing their practices where they need to, and communicating it. Because if McDonald's doesn't communicate what it's doing, someone else is going to step in, and chances are that isn't going to be the story that McDonald's is going to want told. And I just want to close with one last quick thought for you. If the slide would advance. There we go. David mentioned earlier Milton Friedman and his very famous dissertation in the New York Times Magazine from 1970. There are elements of what he said. Yes, you know, the big takeaway is the business of business is business. But this is a quote that comes out of that document as well. And if you look at this, really what he's saying is what we're talking about today. The difference is the game has changed. And the rules are different. And if your organization isn't playing by the new rules of the business game, that's where you're going to fall behind. So I'd argue that Milton Friedman actually was right, partially right. It's just that the environment is a little bit different now.
All right, our next speaker is going to show us some examples of what can be done right and what could be done a little bit better.
Okay. Always fun to go last. Thank you for hanging out and staying to the end. Before I bring up the first slide and example, and there will be some audience participation, and there are prizes for good questions and good answers. So class participation counts. There we go. That'll be a little easier. I just wanted to follow up on an example that Carol Cohn gave that I think is extremely illuminating. The palm oil. It's often very, very hard to know what is the ultimate effect of something that you're doing. We also talked about the Walker potato chips. Another company, I think Tesco over in the UK, tried to do a study of the carbon footprint of all of their products, and they realized the deeper and deeper they pushed, the less and less they knew. You can go all the way back to when the potatoes were planted, but where did the fertilizer come from to do that? And what kind of oil resources were used for that? I mean, where do you stop in the process? And where am I going with this? The point is that if you make a generalized statement about what your company is doing or the impact your product has, you are probably setting yourself up for criticism because we never know overall. Maybe we're using the palm oil and that's better than some other oil for some particular purpose, but we weren't thinking about the orangutans. Or we were advocating the use of a cloth diaper because we were told that disposable diapers fill up the landfills. But then somebody came along and showed that the amount of hot water that was needed for the laundering of the cloth diapers actually burned up more energy overall and resulted in more polluted water. So in any of those instances, and I don't mean to pick on green alone, but if you just say outright, our product is eco-friendly or we're good for the environment, you might not be right, or someone, I won't even say there's necessarily a right or a wrong, there may be different ways of defining what is right and what is the ultimate good. And I'm just going to suggest that thought, and it was only because Carol's example was so telling, that being precise about what you mean, and when you're making comparisons, thinking hard about what you're comparing to, are very important principles, not only from a legal point of view, where you don't want to be accused of false or misleading advertising, and you need to remember that the legal standard is false or misleading. You can make a truthful statement that is nonetheless misleading. And finally, I'm going to pick on Carol one more time because she was kind enough to share some research materials recently on environmental advertising. that when a product is advertised as just eco-friendly, or pick your favorite phrase, what was it, about 48% or 50% of people believe that the product has a positive impact on the environment. Not simply that it is less negative than some other competing product or maybe the earlier version of the product. In other words, almost half the people fundamentally misunderstand what the advertising claim is when it's that broad and it's that simple. And if that's true, then even if you think you have something that you can substantiate, our product removes 75% more whatever, pick your pollutant, than the leading brand. That may be true, because the other brand may remove 2% of that problem and you remove 3% of the problem. In other words, there's still 97% of the problem left, but you've just advertised we remove 75% more. And I bet if you did a consumer survey, you would find that a large number of consumers wouldn't get it, that they would think if you say you remove 75% more than the other side, that on an absolute scale you must have removed at least 75% of the problem, when in fact you were only removing 3% of the problem. Your statement was true, but probably misleading. So, with all of that by way of background, let me roam a little bit, because I hate to sit here cooped up, and let's try a few slides. I'm going to focus for the remainder here on cause marketing. What are we talking about? Primarily sale of a product based on a representation that the purchase is going to benefit a charitable purpose or a charitable organization. And we had Jerry Lewis up here a moment ago, so let's pick on Jerry Lewis again. You probably remember this campaign. It ran for years and years and years, very successful. And this one I put up because I think it's a great example of transparency. You almost don't even need the words. What's the deal? Consumer, you buy a box of Rice Krispies, and what's Kellogg's going to do? Got a dollar bill there. They're going to give a dollar bill to the Muscular Dystrophy Association for every box of Rice Krispies purchased through September 1st. No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, that's it. I think this is a great example. I can't think of a way to criticize it. I don't know if anyone out there can. Let's take a look at another one. Buy these great products. There's a whole bunch down here. Sorry if the focus isn't absolutely clear, but a whole bunch of consumer products, everything you might recognize from the supermarket, help fight muscular dystrophy. Buy these great products and help 1 million Americans too. How? Anybody want to guess? Anybody awake? Well, I couldn't begin to guess either. It doesn't say a blessed thing. Now, would anyone think that that's a good example? That's probably about the worst example that I could find overall. Buy these great products and help 1 million Americans too. I would think, given the fact that cause marketing, using our definition, buy a product and it'll benefit a charity, I would think a lot of consumers seeing that ad must assume that when they buy one of those products, some amount of the purchase price is going to a charity. But we don't really know, do we? Guys, you're going to have to speak up if you want to win any of the prizes. We'll give you a chance. This next one's a good place for you to pitch in. NFL Portraits by J.C. Penney. And so what's the offer? I'm going to apologize a little bit for the quality on this one. Tough to read, but make an appointment today, and with your support, Photography by J.C. Penney is pleased to donate $25,000 to the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Smiles can make a difference. So come in and get your photo taken, and what does your photo translate into for the Muscular Dystrophy Association? Anybody? We have our first winner. Nothing. Nothing. What is J.C. Penney doing here? How does this deal work? You already won your ducks. No, that's anybody. But what's the deal? J.C. Penney is doing what? They're giving $25,000. Which is very nice. They're a great sponsor. Yes, we get another duck here. There you go. maybe like Groucho, why a duck? They're giving $25,000, which is just fine. Have they crossed the line, do we think, and suggested to the consumer that the consumer's action of going in and getting a portrait taken is actually making a difference? I think, yes. I will give them credit, however, that as many of you in the room could recognize, they didn't completely hide the ball. They're not like the prior one, which said help millions of Americans and left you totally guessing. They are saying, we're pleased to donate $25,000. I will give them credit for that. So is this a truthful ad? Yeah, probably, but is it a misleading one? I think they would have some risk. I certainly wouldn't have approved it if they'd come to me first. Now one of my real favorites. Fasten your seatbelts. Save over $43. Look inside for valuable coupons. Save over $43. And then down here, save dollars and help support the Genesis Fund. Before we blow up the fine print, what do you think most consumers would believe this means? Save dollars, use these coupons, and help support the Genesis Fund. Excuse me, sir? Well, that's a good question, and actually, they do have their logo down there, and we'd have to blow up the whole print. Normally in an advertisement like this, there are legal rules that specify you have to identify who the charity is and give contact information for them. I'm not familiar with them in particular myself, but let's assume it's a legitimate 501c3. Someone may know more about that? Oh, that the consumer should make their own separate donation. Save money and help support the Genesis Fund. Well, that's probably a pretty good one. That let's say you had a 50-cent coupon, and you paid 50 cents less, but the 50 cents went off to the charity. Not really sure. I think most consumers would interpret and mean that with each purchase, something is going to the Genesis Fund, a charity which is presumably identified. Let's go to the fine print. By using the enclosed money-saving coupons at your favorite retail store, okay, so make the purchase, you are helping the Genesis Fund. All right, so it's not a separate donation. Use the coupon, you are helping. A portion of the participating manufacturer's cost is donated directly to the Genesis Fund, and by purchasing their favorite brands with It Makes Sense coupons, you encourage their future support. Translation? I'm not sure if a lawyer wrote that, or if maybe it was never shown to the lawyers.
More likely the letter.
Yeah, well, that's right. I don't think anyone up here would have approved that copy. Anyone want to hazard a guess what that means? Yeah, well, a portion of the participating manufacturer's cost. Remember, we've got this advertisement in the Sunday newspaper, and there's all kinds of different brands up there who are all taking part. It's a cooperative advertising vehicle, a very common thing, and every one of these companies pays whatever they pay to have their ad show up in this insert that's going to go in your Sunday newspaper. They couldn't afford to buy space in all of those newspapers around the country on their own, but they each buy in this cooperative vehicle, and that works very well. So somehow the cooperative vehicle, the publisher, is taking, let's say, Arm & Hammer baking soda is in there. They paid $100,000 to appear in this publication. Maybe $10,000 of that $100,000 fee that Arm & Hammer paid to be in the book is what goes to the charity. Again, what does that have to do with the consumer's purchase? Zippo. Nothing. Nada. They do try to hang on by their fingernails at the end and say, well, by purchasing their brands, you encourage their future support. Maybe they'll do it again if you buy a lot of their stuff. Pretty tenuous. Pretty tenuous. Before we talk about that one, I'm just going to leave a thought because the last few, and I don't know if we have a button to go backward, but that's all right. We'll leave this one up here. in any of those situations, let's say we go back to our first Jerry Lewis. Buy the cereal. When you do, $1 will go to the charity. What if that offer was limited to the first $50,000 or the first 50,000 boxes? We'll give up to $50,000. Not too bad. And we even disclose that. Anybody still have a problem? I see heads shaking. What if we have 7 million boxes on the shelf that all have this offer printed on the box? 50,000 of them sold on the first day of the 3-month period that they're all on the shelf. As the consumer, who's standing there as the 50,001th potential buyer, do you have any clue or any way to know whether your purchase is going to count or not? Okay, think about how transparent that might be. Take the other side of it. There's a minimum guarantee. The sponsor, and a lot of the larger charities now require a guaranteed minimum as the cost of admission if you're going to play in this game. They require a minimum of $50,000 from the sponsor. And the sponsor is only going to make 50,000 specially marked packages. Now, we don't have that problem of 7 million specially marked packages, so you're not going to deceive the 50,001th consumer. But as to those first 50,000 people, do we have an issue as to them? Sponsor made a guaranteed donation of 50,000. So what if nobody ever bought one package? How much was going to get donated? How about if 50,000 packages get donated? How much is going to get donated? So how much difference does the consumer action make in that instance? Are we possibly misleading people? Okay. And then finally, just to walk through this set of issues, because trust me, if you have to deal with these, your marketing departments are going to come to you with these ideas. The flat donation. Hey, we're giving $100,000 to so-and-so. Or like JCPenney, we're giving $25,000. And they come to the marketing department and they say, we want to advertise this as 25 cents per pack or $1 per photograph or whatever we're going to do. Do you approve that or not? It's a flat donation. There's a maximum and a minimum. We're giving $25,000. How do people feel about then advertising $1 per unit for 25,000 units? Yes? No? Yeah, we got a no back there. If it's a flat donation, then I think you're crossing a line when you're trying to engage the consumer and make the consumer believe that his or her action is going to make a difference. All of this, kind of an elaborate and maybe overly detailed, I apologize for that, focus on one very specific area with advertising claims where it may not really be clear to the consumer what's going on behind the curtain. And the deal, what's going on behind the curtain, needs to match with what you're telling consumers, and what it needs to match is not just some potential literal truth, but it shouldn't be misleading either. I'm going to do one more, and then I think maybe we'll switch into conversation mode after that. I've got several, but I think one more. The one we've got here right now I think is interesting, and it touches on a different issue. And I remember that there are several not-for-profit organizations here today, and this is very significant for you as well as the business partner. Ready with Power for the year 2000. I need some new ads, I know. But oldie but goodie. Ready with savings, too. Prepare for the year 2000 with the American Red Cross checklist. So Energizer is running this ad, and they got coupons down here for the batteries. They're getting us ready for when the rolling blackout is going to throw us all back into the Stone Age. And they're talking about the American Red Cross checklist, which is a well-known thing. The Red Cross has these little preparedness lists and the first aid kit you should have and everything for an emergency. Very good. And down here, American Cross will be there. And the small print there, Energizer is proud to team up with the American Red Cross. Okay. Who is supporting whom here? Who is saying something about the other. We've got two parties. We've got Energizer, and we've got the American Red Cross. Who thinks that this ad is Energizer promoting the fact that it is a sponsor of and is supporting the American Red Cross? Put your hand up. Who thinks that this is an ad of the American Red Cross endorsing or approving Energizer batteries as the battery that you should have in your preparedness kit? A minority, but a measurable one. Well, and Energizer is proud to team up with the American Red Cross. Does that, when we focus on that wording, does that affect anybody, make you tilt more the other way? Well, the American Red Cross did insist on including the following statement, that their name and emblem are used with permission which in no way constitutes endorsement, express or implied, of this product. Now, it's pretty small down there. That's, that's in this teeny little box. That statement probably was there because of IRS regulations, which say that if a charity does endorse or give an inducement to buy a commercial product, then the money it receives from the sponsor can be taxable. And most charities don't want to have that happen. It also could be there to try to address the situation of the false advertising, because I'm assuming that Red Cross has not tested or reviewed batteries, and even if they did, query whether there would be any substantial difference between a Duracell battery and an Energizer battery or Rayovac battery, any of the brand names, really, and how good they are. And it might therefore be false or misleading to suggest that the Red Cross is somehow endorsing this product. But in the absence of a clear explanation of what a charity's logo is doing on a product or in an advertisement, in the absence of some explanation, I think you run a risk that people are going to assume that the charity is saying something about the sponsor's product, at least where there's a natural affinity or connection between them. I choose this one in particular because I think it sits kind of on the cusp. It's a borderline case of whether the Red Cross would be saying something about batteries. Take a different example. Blood pressure gauges and thermometers and other home medical devices with the American Medical Association logo on them, with no explanation. Just an AMA logo on this stuff that you see in Duane Reade or CVS or wherever. How many would think that that suggests that the American Medical Association approves or endorses that product? I sure do. Well, the membership of the American Medical Association felt the same way after they found out that their board and their administration had approved a deal. They took $1 million from Sunbeam about 10 years ago in a licensing deal, and their logo got put onto all of these products with no explanation of what was going on. Well, that kind of set off a whole trigger, and there are some state guidelines out there now which suggest that, as certainly in a case where there's any possibility that people might understand of who is endorsing whom, that you should explain.
And we got to move on to some questions.
So we're going to move on. That's the end of the slides. Thanks for your participation, and there are a few more ducks.
A sobering look at what's actually going on in the marketplace. I'd like you to put any questions you have on cards and pass them up. While we're doing that, I wanted to ask the panelists to talk about what I think is sort of the hardest question in corporate transparency. We've heard this morning that the best corporate responsibility programs are integrated throughout the entire corporation. But what if you have a corporation that is moving into the corporate responsibility mode and wants to communicate to consumers what it is doing, doesn't have a complete program in place yet? I'd like to ask Susan just to talk about what she would tell a corporation in that circumstance, and then ask Rhonda what she would be telling a marketing department when they came up with the ad. Susan?
Certainly. I guess the first thing I would say is know what really is happening in your organization. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And take a real, clear, candid look and be honest with yourselves about where the opportunities lie that you can leverage in a marketing and communications realm and a business realm, but also really understand what those liabilities are and start the process to address them. Because it is a process. As I said earlier, this is something that for those who've either been doing it throughout the history of the organization or are just starting in it, this is something that once you start, you will be doing it forever, basically, because it's no longer a question of is it a good thing to do or not a good thing to do. It is expected by organizations. So the first thing is do an inventory, audit what's happening across the entire organization, look as deeply as you possibly can, and understand, again, where the opportunities are and where the vulnerabilities are. And if you choose to start communicating about it, think about what's relevant to your stakeholders. And it may be something very different to employees than it is to the advocacy groups or the activists or the other influencers that you need to deal with, policymakers, regulators, and so forth. It may be a very different message to your B2B customers than it is to consumers. And you really have to have that knowledge and insight, knowing what you're dealing with before you start saying anything. Because the challenge will be that you will go out with some sort of fanfare, large or small, and all of a sudden you've found yourself exposed to something that you didn't expect. And that's where you run into some issues. And let me give just one very quick example. Another client of ours is Toyota. Toyota, I think anyone could argue, is making great strides across the board in terms of corporate responsibility, but particularly in terms of sustainability. The Prius. That in and of itself is a wonderful example. Well, guess what? Is anybody familiar with the dust-to-dust research that came out last year? There was research that was done that compared the entire lifespan of the Toyota Prius to a Hummer. And guess which one, according to this research, is more environmentally friendly? It's the Hummer. And when you stop and think about how a Prius is manufactured, and Prius is a wonderful product to have in the marketplace. It is a wonderful thing for us to have access to hybrid vehicles. But when you look at how the material is derived to create the batteries, it's this horrible smelting operation up in Canada. And oh, by the way, the cars aren't manufactured here. So pieces of them are manufactured on this side of the Pacific. Then they're all shipped overseas where the cars are assembled, go through final manufacturing, and then they come back here. And what these researchers were able to do was to literally take a look at the comparison of the lifespan of all of the components that go into the Prius and compare it to the lifespan of all of the components that go into a Hummer. And again, this is from a U.S. focus base. And it's really stunning to think that here's a company that is doing remarkable things in terms of their environmental policy, sustainability, and corporate responsibility overall, making great strides, and yet you do this incredibly stark comparison, and a Hummer is more environmentally friendly than what most people would think is probably the most environmentally friendly car that's out there. So what does Toyota do? It deals with the research. It deals with the situation. Because it had been out in the marketplace for so long communicating about so many different things that it was doing, Toyota was able to withstand the challenge that it took from that research. And you know what? Most people still think the Prius is the most environmentally friendly car that's out there. But if you follow this research, maybe it's not. So again, the point is really understand what's going on in all of your operations. Know what your vulnerabilities are. Know what kinds of things you can talk about. And don't just focus on the things that are positives and strengths for the organization, but clearly and openly communicate and engage your stakeholders in dialogue about those areas that are a challenge as well.
Rhonda, your marketing department's in your office. What do you want to know?
Well, I want you to pass 4 tests. The first test is basically, do you have a plan? Have you really thought about what's going on? And I actually have the person in our department, we have a dedicated paralegal who runs due diligence, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why that's important. So, do you have a plan as opposed to just a bright idea? I'm happy to hear the bright idea, but I can't really rule on an idea. I can brainstorm with you about the potential legal ramifications of joining together a company that sells Viagra and, one of our teen magazines that has, there are things that just aren't appropriate that either you may not know, because we do a lot of electronic marketing, and there are increasingly companies that serve up sort of interstitial ads, so that in addition to your primary message with great charity, Red Cross, great trusted brand Time Inc., there's going to be something popped up that's something else that you don't have any control over. And often our marketers, fresh out of school, waving their MBAs before me, have not thought about any of this. They have the great idea, and they want to have the best $1 million campaign. That's fine. That's their job. My job is to calm them down and ask all the questions. So first, what have you thought about? What do you know? And then secondly, can we do it? I'm the lawyer here. My job is, can we do it? And sometimes the answer to that is yes, hyper-technically. Often they're not laws on point. We're in the wild, wild west here. Nobody knows what's going on much in electronic marketing. So most state legislators are applying laws that are on the books that were drafted years ago to print advertising that haven't really thought about the global, and sort of instantaneous distribution implications of electronic marketing and communications, which is, as we know, my stepson who's 18, he talks to me all the time. That's the world he's living in. It's all about now. It's all real time. It's not me who, I love books, I like to smell the pages. What can I tell you? So, speaking of smell, the next test is the smell test. Does this really feel a little funny to you? Ed gave us, this was just such a good primer for, some of this is just common sense, folks. If you look at it and it looks too good to be true, I'm an old FTCer. The answer is, it probably is. So we need to be clear about what we're stating, and we need to know or have some sense of what the consumer might take away from the message we're trying to send. And then lastly, does it pass the laugh test? I mean, come on. I see maybe 8 to 10,000 potential promotions a year of my team, and a third of those have some terrible fundraising piece. So some of it is just, does it make sense to put the people brand with dog food? Whatever. So I think that we want to go back to due diligence now. I've had green as an example. Everybody's so excited about green that they haven't thought about what it means and what it means to consumers. And Ed's right. Often the consumer is going to take away your message unless you're very clear about all of your disclosures and your advertising claims that you are saying that you are doing something good with the product that you are trying to get them to buy. That has to be true, or you can't put it out there. You just can't do that. And I had, just in the last 3 months, some really bright young marketers come to me with 8 potential green partners. And what they wanted us to do was to select 1 or 2 of those, tie it to a specific title, we call our magazines titles or books, and then find a way to appropriately market this really great partnership. Well, the first thing I said to them is, well, how much do you know about green partner number 1? Oh, we don't know. We just saw it on the internet. It looked really great. No. So we have paralegals. You must do due diligence. Who are they? Where did they come from? Who do they serve? Are they regional, local, state, national, international? Do they have a bricks and mortar address? The whole purpose of a lot of the CAN-SPAM disclosures is the reason why there's an address at the bottom, hopefully, of every email that you get is so that if you need to sue them, to tell them to stop sending you the crap, then you need to know who and where they can be found. If you need to deliver your complaint, there has to be a way to deliver it. So due diligence is key. Finding out as much as you can, not only about what you're already doing, but about anybody you propose to do business with. Do they pay their bills? Do they have a track record? Have they been sued? Do they like to sue? Might they sue you? You need to know all of that, and that's our job. So what I would say to you is involve the legal department with your marketers as early as possible. If you don't have in-house, then go out-house. And then I think it's worth the investment to think carefully before you establish your corporate social responsibility matrix.
Okay, and with that, I think that we are concluded. I'm sorry there was not time for questions from the audience, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And another excellent panel. And I want to pick up on something that was said in this one and I think before, how corporate social responsibility, individuals' behavior really counts. Now, this program was all about corporate social responsibility, but it's also the BBB's annual business meeting. So we have two very brief orders of business which go along with this whole theme. There's a gentleman in the audience that we want to bring up here. His name is John Puglisi. He's the chairman of the board for the Better Business Bureau. He's been the Better Business Bureau's chairman of the board since 2004, and he's passing the gavel to someone new today. And he's been a longtime supporter of the BBB. He actually was one of the people who brought me on board, so thank you very much for that. And throughout his tenure with the BBB, he has been the epitome of someone with that corporate social responsibility mindset. He has led this organization through some positive change, as I said, and has just done magnificent things. And actually, he's moving on to another chapter in his life. And again, we just want to take this moment to really recognize him and thank him. We have a plaque for you. John, why don't you join me? I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, this is great. I wasn't expecting this, and I'd like to thank everyone, and in particular Claire and the volunteers for the Better Business Bureau and also the members. And being that I wasn't prepared for this, let me just spend the next hour telling you what I think. But no, I want to say to everyone, it's been my pleasure to serve with such an esteemed board and also the employees of the Better Business Bureau. It's amazing how each and every day their passion and their energy is to do good. It's contagious. It's heartwarming. And it's also knowing that the people that are here that you see that put events on like this are really focused on doing one thing, and that is to help people. And I think at the very least, that is something which I was very proud to be associated with. I came from the corporate world, and that's not to say the corporate world doesn't help people. We do. But it's interesting to work with a group like this because it does change your perspective a bit, and you do take some of that back, and you start to incorporate the things that you learn at these kind of events and also at meetings. And in particular, I like to say and close with that it's been probably the best time I've had since '98 being associated with the Better Business Bureau. But more importantly, I'd also like to congratulate Claire because I think she's done a wonderful, wonderful job in the short period of time. She's only been here almost a year, or a year now has passed. So I'd like to congratulate her for doing a wonderful job, and I'm proud that this organization is on the right track. And the new chairman is Paul Galliano, who's not here right now. He's in Milan at a retreat. No, I didn't make that one. I would have loved it. But he's going to take this to the next level. And so I'd like to thank everyone here for its attendance, and more in particular, I'd like to thank Claire and the Better Business Bureau for doing a wonderful job. Thank you.
And now, thank you, John. And now I would like to bring another board member to the podium, Melissa Krantz, who will take care of the business of today. Melissa is the holder of the proxies, and she will vote the proxies of all the members. And what we're going to do is just read to you, basically, that's yours, and we'll just have the new people come up on the screen as they are.
As a longtime member of the BBB Board of Directors, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank all of the BBB accredited business members who are present with us today for your invaluable support. Your participation in the BBB is truly valued and valuable. Today is our annual meeting. Our program for the day is over now, but as you can see, your BBB is making new efforts to serve you with educational programs and outreach. We look forward to doing more for you, even more for you of that. I am the proxy holder for BBB board nominations at our annual meeting today, In that role, I'd like to read the list of the names of board members and officers who have been nominated and elected to the board of the BBB serving metropolitan New York, Long Island, and the Mid-Hudson region as of today. Our new chairman is Paul, and as Paul Galliano, and as John mentioned, Paul is not with us today. He is the thank you. He is the co-head of the Acquisition, Capital Markets, Dispositions, and Joint Ventures of Tishman Speyer Properties. Continuing as vice chairman is Peggy Foran of Pfizer. Peggy is Senior Vice President of Corporate Governance, Associate General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary of Pfizer, Inc. Michelle, I'm going to mess up your name for sure. Michelle Imbesiani, a longtime board member, renews her role as vice chair of our board and is here today also. I saw her earlier. Hi, Michelle. And region executive of Banco Popular North America. Another of our board members, Valerie Reardon, also joins the executive committee as a vice chair today. Valerie is senior vice president of Health Insurance Plan of Greater New York, known to many of us as HIP. Our fabulous host today and great speaker and friend, Rhonda McLean, who has been a BB director for some time and assumes a new role as treasurer of the BBB as of now. Rhonda is associate general counsel of Time, Inc. Those are our new BBB, 3Bs, board officers, and I'd like to name the BB directors who have also been reelected. Paul Campbell, Vice President, Human Resources of Polo Ralph Lauren. Rochelle Friedman, President of J&R Music and Computer World. Tom Matthews, Group Vice President, Asset Protection, Operations, Logistics, and Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer of Saks Fifth Avenue. Joseph McAvoy of Joseph E. McAvoy Consulting. Elise Myers, Vice President for Brand Programs at the New York Times. Congratulations to all our newly elected or re-elected BBB directors and officers. And thank you once again to our members. Claire.
Thank you, Melissa. And again, for those left in the room, thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists. For those of you on the executive committee, just meet me up here, and we'll take us to the next stage. But again, thanks to everybody, and thank you to everyone from the BBB for making this such a great day. Thank you.